All right. Welcome to our Land Use Committee meeting of Monday, February 5th, 2018. I'm Katie Tang, our chair of the committee, and we are joined by new Vice Chair, Supervisor Jane Kim. Welcome. Welcome back. And of course, returning member, Supervisor Safai. Our clerk is Victor Young. From SF TV, we'd like to thank Nona Melkonian and Jesse Larson. Mr. Clerk, are there any announcements?
Yes. Please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the February 13th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated. I would also like to note that we currently have a quorum of the board constituting a special meeting of the Board of Supervisors at this time.
Thank you. And it's been properly noticed as such?
Yes, it has.
Okay, great. And I forgot to mention, my apologies, we are joined by Supervisors Yee, Fewer, and Stephanie here as well. Mr. Clerk, I'm going to call or ask you to call item 3 out of order, just because we need to make some amendments and then have the item likely continued. So item 3, please.
Item number 3, ordinance amending the planning code to establish the Gary Masonic Special Use District in the area generally bounded by the Gary Boulevard to the south, Masonic Avenue to the east, and assessors parcel block numbers 1071, lots numbers 1 and 4 to the north and west.
Thank you. Supervisor Stephanie, the new sponsor of this item.
Thank you, Chair Tang. Colleagues, thank you for hearing this item today. I'm thrilled to be able to put the final touches on this project that has taken over 2 years to get to this stage. I was an aide when this first came to District 2, and it's great to see how far this project has come. This SUD allows a housing development to go from 21 units to 95 units, while the building remains the same size. It allows the number of affordable housing units in the project to go from 3 to 22. That's more affordable units than the total number of units in the original project. These are homes for 95 families to join the neighborhood along a transit corridor. I want to thank the neighbors, Laurel Heights Improvement Association, and Anza Vista neighbors for being so forward-thinking. I know Kathy DeVincenzi and Al Sodini have put a lot of work on this. We want to thank them for supporting such a dense project in a neighborhood that hasn't seen any new housing, which I know is challenging for many neighborhoods. So thank you to those neighborhood organizations. This project is a uniquely dense infill project that is labor and neighbor supported. It took a lot of work, and I thank the broad coalition of people who did work on this. I'm very happy to be carrying this across the finish line here today. I do have a couple of amendments in response to the Planning Commission's recommendations, and I have handed those amendments out to my colleagues. First, the exclusionary rate goes from 18% to 23%. And that's broken down as follows: 10% at 55% of AMI, 5% at 80% of AMI, 4% at 110% of AMI, and 5% at 120% of AMI. And then, of course, the appropriate AMI bands will apply. The second recommendation is around the car share spaces. The Commission recommended 4 of the spaces be reserved for car share. So on the advice of the City Attorney, we have increased the findings regarding car share to require 4 of the 16 parking spaces in this project to be reserved for car share use.
And those are all the amendments?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do we want to get a motion to move those amendments?
Yes. So I'd like to make a motion to accept those amendments, incorporate them.
All right. And Supervisor Safai, did you want to speak on the item as well?
Nope. No.
Okay.
Supervisor Stephanie summed it all up wonderfully.
All right. Okay, so at this time, if there are no other questions or comments, any staff presentation? Nope. Then we will go to public comment on the item 3, and I have 3 cards: Richard Frisbee, Michael Kohalan, and Colleen Ryan. And if anyone else would like to speak on item 3, please come on up. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Chris May of Planning Department staff. Just wanted to summarize the Planning Commission's actions from a couple of months ago. On November 30th, 2017, the Planning Commission, after hearing and closing public comment, approved the proposed ordinance with modifications recommended by planning staff. The modifications to the ordinance increased the required on-site affordable housing provision from 18 to 23% for rentals at the AMI levels prescribed by Section 415 of the Planning Code. This recommendation was made on the basis that the proposed SUD confers density increases that are commensurate with the level of increase contemplated in the Home SF program, and therefore an increased on-site affordable housing rate for projects within the proposed SUD is appropriate. Staff wants to thank Mayor Farrell for amending the ordinance to include the Commission's recommendations. At the same hearing, the Planning Commission also granted conditional use authorization to demolish the existing one-story building and to construct an 80-foot tall, 8-story mixed-use building containing 95 residential dwelling units above approximately 1,700 square feet of ground floor commercial space, 16 off-street parking spaces, and 120 bicycle parking spaces. The Commission added a condition of approval that at least 4 of the 16 proposed parking spaces are dedicated for car share use. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Okay. Nope, seeing none, then we will go back to public comment, actually. Please come on up. You'll each have 2 minutes to speak on this item.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Richard Frisbee with the Laurel Heights Improvement Association. I would like to say we support what this project has become. It's taken a lot of work, as Supervisor Stephanie pointed out, but with meetings with the developer, planning, supervisor's office, we've got something that I think works for all 3 parties. And I'd like to thank everyone for the work that's gone into it. It's not been easy, but it has been useful, and what came out of it is something we all think will benefit the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Michael Caholan. I am a 40-year resident and property owner on Wood Street, just a block away from the project. I'd like to echo my friend Dick Frisbee's comments that the neighborhood, of which I'm a part of and also part of the Laurel Heights Improvement Association, is in support of this project. I'd like to extend my welcome to Supervisor Stefani for coming back to District 2. We're glad to have you. And I also noticed on the way in that the actual developers are there in the back. And I said this at the Planning Hearing Commission. I wanted to also thank them again for being so transparent and upfront with the neighborhood. I think this is a key thing for this commission and the board and the planning department to pay attention to in the future, because there's a lot of projects coming online that things work. They work when the developer is upfront, transparent, communicative to the neighborhood, and we all get to have a conversation. So it's been a while. Really appreciate everyone's efforts. Also, Chris May is back here, I noticed. I believe I got your name right, with planning, who I think he's a staff person who's done really an exceptional job at working hard to get the neighborhood and the developer together and get this project done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Colleen Ryan, and I live on Emerson Street adjacent to the project. And I also echo Dick and Michael's comments. We're really pleased that the developer worked with us. We were concerned when the height was going to be overshadowing our properties, and 80 feet we get. So we thank you guys again for that. And Christopher May definitely worked hard and called us all back promptly, which we appreciate also. So we're in support of the project, and we appreciate the fact that things are working. We do understand that the city needs housing. It should be noted, I think, also that the city should be very proud of the fact that you took a 12,000-foot lot, and which was zoned for 21 units, and are creating 95 units. So that's pretty impressive. Our one concern, and is the concern of all my neighbors on Emerson, is the fact that where Geary and Masonic funnel into there is a very small little corner, and there can be a lot of traffic where Trader Joe's is, and we know that the developer's trying to work out a plan. We are going to wait to see if the traffic is going to be okay getting home each day. Our kids take the bus. We walk and bike through there. And so traffic is really a problem in that corner. So we're really hoping that that part works out. But we are pleased that housing's coming, and we are supportive of that. Finally, I walk in the neighborhood a ton. I have a dog. And we never got a notice for this or saw one on any type of pole, which we did a few months ago. And while we don't have a problem with it, because we had Kathy DeVincenzi an excellent negotiator for us. There was no noticing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Danny Campbell with the Sheet Metal Workers, Local 104, and my colleagues Alex Landsberg and with Electrical Workers, Local 6, John Corso with Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, Local 38. Very excited about this project. It's going to deliver low-income, moderate-income, and market-rate housing to our city's housing supply. Worked very closely with former Supervisor Mark Farrell's office. Want to thank him and his staff. Planning, and not to mention the project sponsor. This project, will deliver community benefits in the form of good middle-class construction jobs for local residents and career pathways for residents through our state-approved apprenticeship programs. So we look forward to your support for this SUD. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. And of course, anyone else who would like to speak on this project.
Good afternoon, Todd David on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Very excited to support this project. I really want to give kudos to the neighborhood for embracing density and more housing for families in San Francisco. I hope it's a model that can be repeated many places on the west side of San Francisco because we certainly need more housing. As far as the traffic concerns, I hope that this is also kind of starts to be an impetus for us to start thinking about maybe some subways out to the west side or some more rapid transit. But we certainly need to be making sure that we can move people around in San Francisco without them having to get into their cars. So overall, great job, and we're very excited to support it. Bye.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public who wish to speak on item 3? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Stephanie, is there any other remarks? No? Okay, so at this time, we had a motion to amend per what Supervisor Stephanie outlined earlier. So can we get a motion on the item as amended?
So a motion to move forward with positive recommendation.
Okay, and we'll do that without objection. Oh, I'm sorry. Deputy City Attorney John Malamut. Oh, to continue the item.
Oh, because it has amendments. So I'll amend my motion and make that a motion to continue for 1 week.
Okay, great. So is that okay?
As
Deputy City
amended.
Attorney? As amended.
The motion, you should make a motion to adopt the amendments, but then continue the item 1 week.
Yes. So, colleagues, I had heard a motion to amend. There was a second, so we're going to amend it, and then we had a motion to continue for 1 week. All right. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Clerk, can you please call items 1 and 2 together?
Item number 1, hearing on the efficacy of the city's vacant abandoned property ordinance and strategies for preventing vacant storefronts. Item number 2, hearing on the findings of the 2017 retail study conducted by the Office of Economic and Workforce Development that reviewed the state of the retail industry nationally and locally and provide an overview of challenges and opportunities for San Francisco's neighborhoods and retail commercial districts.
Thank you very much. I want to thank sponsors of the hearing, Supervisors Fewer, Ronan, Yee, I guess for the District 2 office. I don't know if Supervisor Stephanie is taking over, but certainly, even though my name's not on this, it's something that, it's a topic that I've been very interested in as well. So I want to thank my colleagues for bringing this to our attention. We are going to hear from many, many departments that are working very hard day in and day out on this issue. The Office of Economic and Workforce Development, our Department of Building Inspection. We will hear from our Budget and Legislative Analyst Office on the report. And also we have planning staff as well. And I forget if I mentioned DBI, but Department of Building Inspection. So with that said, I know that there's a lot of work that we all do in our respective supervisors' offices in conjunction with our other city departments in trying to both recruit and retain businesses in our commercial corridors. And I know that each of our corridors have their own sets of challenges or attractiveness, but especially when you throw into the mix the changing face of retail and that there's so much e-commerce going on right now, I know that it's a conversation we all need to have as a city family in terms of whether we need to reconsider how it is that we zone our city and our commercial neighborhoods, how it is that we deal with our vacant and abandoned properties, and so forth. So with that said, I'd like to kick it over to Supervisor Fewer, who is the lead sponsor on the first hearing.
Thank you, Chair Tang. Long before I ran for this office, vacant commercial storefronts have been a concern for residents and merchants of the Richmond District. In my district, as well as across the city, storefronts left vacant for not only months but years can have a terrible impact on the neighborhood. Long-time empty storefronts contribute to blight as well as issues around cleanliness and safety. They hurt surrounding businesses that rely on foot traffic and wear down the pride that neighbors have in their neighborhood. And empty commercial storefronts withheld from the market may contribute to rising commercial rents. I want to thank in advance all the departments that will be presenting on this issue today, and I understand that there are steps that have been taken, including legislation in 2014 from Supervisor Tang. I am really looking forward to today's presentations and the discussion about next steps, because while there are many reasons that contribute to vacant commercial storefronts, what is clear to me is that we aren't doing enough as a city to prevent them. As I know we'll hear today, our current mechanisms for tracking empty commercial storefronts and buildings are not capturing the true scope of the problem, and enforcement seems to be non-existent. For instance, the BLA report states that the currently reported commercial vacancies, none are located in the Richmond District. And let me tell you, I beg to differ. Just ask a neighbor who lives near Balboa and 6th Avenue. I hope that this hearing serves to eliminate the current status of our systems addressing commercial vacancies and some of the action steps we can take to minimize such vacancies and the negative impacts on our neighborhoods. Our goal as a city should be to support vibrant commercial corridors with storefronts that meet the needs of our neighborhoods. I believe Supervisor Yee also has comments on this, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Fewer. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, Chair Tang. I asked the Budget and Legislative Analyst's Office to prepare a report on commercial vacancies because, like every other supervisor in the city, I am concerned with the vitality of our commercial corridors. While we have many vacant businesses throughout our neighborhoods, it is obvious when you stroll down our streets that some blocks have a chronic issue with storefront vacancy, and that can lead to blight and make our neighborhoods feel run down and neglected. Though we passed the vacant building regulations in 2009 and again in 2014, we have not been seeing the kind of improvement that we had hoped for. This hearing is designed to provide us with information of our current situation as well as recommendations on how we can improve enforcement of our current laws and ideas for dealing with this issue using new approaches. It's not like San Francisco is alone on this issue. There's other jurisdictions that have taken different approaches to improve. Commercial vacancy issues can potentially be addressed through zoning, and high rents and the rise of e-commerce are challenging traditional retailers in San Francisco and elsewhere. Places like Seattle has been taking it on for a few years now. And I'd like to say that I appreciate the discussion we're going to have at the end of this, where there's some policy options that will be presented. And one of them I had focused on and maybe have been working on this already. The Board of Supervisors could request that, for instance, the Planning Department and Planning Commission to consider and report back on possible zoning and planning code changes. So I'd like to say that I've been working on an issue that might change some of the zoning to benefit some of these vacant commercial property that we're seeing. What we're seeing is that there's certain areas where they build these commercial spaces and it's been sitting empty, brand new for 2 to 3, sometimes 4 years. And so one of the things that I'm doing is working with the Planning Department and OEWD to come up with one idea that can help with solving some of these issues. And I'm hoping to present that sometime this month.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. If there are no further comments, then I think we were going to have the budget and legislative analyst provide their report findings first.
Good afternoon, Chair Tang, members of the committee, and supervisors. Excuse me, I'm Fred Brousseau from the Budget and Legislative Analyst Office. And we prepared a policy analysis report for Supervisor Yee on preventing and filling commercial vacancies. It was issued last month, and I'll provide a summary of it for you today. So to start, commercial vacancies, causes, and effects. There's normal turnover, of course, which happens to all kinds of businesses, and spaces are vacated and put on the market and occupied again. But there are other causes for commercial vacancies, including owners' lack of information about tools and ways of finding new tenants, speculation to obtain higher rents or sales prices in the future. Sometimes buildings just stay vacant, waiting for a tenant who will pay a higher rent. Neighborhood conditions sometimes make properties unattractive to a new tenant, so perhaps the owner is trying to lease it out but is having difficulty attracting someone. City regulations and zoning can be a factor. Disputes among owners. Sometimes there are families, for example, that own businesses, or a group of business people, and they don't agree on the approach to the property or what the rent should be, or how to market it. So sometimes they sit empty while there are just internal disputes like that. In addition, and it was mentioned in some of the earlier comments, the world of retail, of course, has changed dramatically in recent years. So another factor is the lack of demand. Some of the commercial space cannot be filled because a lot of retailers are curtailing their businesses or cutting back entirely. And so the effect of all this is prolonged, particularly for prolonged vacancies or abandonments, not those that are just normal business cycle types, can be blight, loss of community serving small businesses, and weaker neighborhood economies. To address that, there are a couple of things the city has done. One is it has adopted 2 ordinances to deal with vacant and abandoned buildings and vacant and abandoned commercial storefronts. They're 2 different ordinances, but they're both embedded now in the building code. And they're similar in structure in that they require owners of vacant or abandoned buildings, that can be residential or commercial, to register with the Department of Building Inspection, and they have to pay an annual fee of $711 as long as the buildings are vacant. Then the commercial storefront ordinance, which was adopted in 2014, added, besides full buildings, just individual storefronts. And it's a similar structure in that owners are to report to the Department of Building Inspection and pay a $711 annual fee. One difference in that case is the fee is not due until 9 months after the registration to allow the owner's time to market or repair the property. There are fines attached to lack of compliance with this, and they can vary based on the amount of time that has transpired. One thing that's important to point out about these ordinances is they exclude buildings and commercial storefronts that are currently under permit for repairs or are being actively marketed. So they would not be required to register, but those that are empty and don't fit under those conditions are required to register and pay the annual fee. In addition to those ordinances, there are numbers of programs and services administered largely by the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. They're aimed at preventing commercial vacancies or assisting tenants and owners in filling commercial vacancies. The programs are listed here, and I know they're speaking later, so we can probably give you more details on all of those, but we do have descriptions of each of the programs in our report. We started with this analysis in trying to determine how many buildings and commercial storefronts are vacant or abandoned, a number we thought would be relatively easy to get, but it was not. There are a number of reports and measures made by both city agencies and, of course, private sector real estate companies, but none of them capture the totality of all commercial buildings and storefronts and their vacancy rates. We can get certainly a lot of information about downtown commercial properties and their vacancy rates, and we can get commercial spaces throughout the city that are not receiving mail. The Office of Economic and Workforce Development does just commercial storefronts, but for 24 commercial corridors only, so it's still not the citywide rate. On this chart, you can see some of the rates that are reported and tracked. OEWD reported 5% as a whole for the 24 corridors they track, 8.2% by the city controller for commercial vacancies downtown in 2016. And the U.S. Postal Service, as I mentioned, which reports all commercial addresses that are not receiving mail for 90 or more days, had a rate of 7.4%. And there are about 45,000 commercial sites or addresses in San Francisco, so that gives you some perspective on that. In terms of the abandoned and vacant commercial property ordinances, the two I mentioned, so those are administered by the Department of Building Inspection, and by the ordinances they maintain registries to keep track of how many buildings have reported that they're vacant and paid their fee. And you see on this chart the numbers for 2013 through 2016. The commercial storefront ordinance was not in place in those first 2 years, which is why that is blank. But you can see for the last 2 years, and focusing just on the commercial buildings were 30 in 2015 and 28 in 2016. As for storefronts, 38 were on the registry in 2015 and 25 in 2016. Comparing this to some of the other numbers that we obtained about commercial vacancies, we concluded that there is low compliance with the two ordinances. The numbers are low, certainly low relative to all commercial vacancies that are reported, but in addition, they have been geographically concentrated. So, for example, in 2016, 16 of the 25 commercial storefronts reported were on Haight Streets and Polk Streets alone. In 2015, 33 of the 38 were just on 3 streets, 3rd Street, Mission, and Ocean Avenue. So we know just from casual observation that there are properties on other streets that are vacant or abandoned, and this is not capturing the full inventory. There were none reported in 2016 in Chinatown, Castro, the Richmond District, the Central Mission, or the Financial District. And we did review a study done by Hoodline, and they did an inventory in the Castro District in March 2017 and found 53 vacant commercial storefronts. Now, these could include some that weren't required to register by the ordinance, but it's an indication of the volume of vacancies in commercial properties, and some of which we assume are probably qualify as vacant or abandoned. This map is a representation of the commercial properties reported by the U.S. Postal Service for the 4th quarter of 2016. And we included it because it shows the distribution of vacancies and the rates. And you can see the darker the color, the higher the rate of commercial vacancies. Again, not all of these would be subject to the ordinance and required to register, but it does tell you that they are located in neighborhoods throughout the city, and we assume wherever there are blocks of commercial properties, there's going to be some in the subset, which is what qualifies as vacant or abandoned by the ordinances. In addition to a low number of properties that are on the registries with the Department of Building Inspection, because they pay fees, we collected information on the fees that have been paid in the last 4 years, and that's presented in this chart. It has not been a very high amount, particularly for the commercial buildings or the commercial storefronts, as you can see, under $5,000 for both of them in 2016. And the numbers that paid are also lower than the numbers that were on the registry, 7 commercial buildings and 5 commercial storefronts. So that can represent different things. One is the owner may not have been in communication with the Department of Building Inspection, because in many cases the vacant property is reported not by the owner but by neighbors. Neighbors will call in and inform DBI that there's a space that's vacant. So sometimes it gets on the registry without the owner's involvement. In other cases, they simply have not made the payment yet. In addition, another measure for the vacant and abandoned commercial property program is abatements and closures of cases. And you can see here, looking at the last 4 years also, that it's a small number of cases that get abated and closed. And abated means that that all the violations, because some of these properties have, besides the problem of being vacant, they may have other building code or planning code violations that are being addressed at the same time. And if the owner hasn't resolved that, the case isn't abated. And sometimes the case is abated, but the final payments haven't been made and the case finally closed. So there's a low rate of compliance on these cases, or closure, I should say, excuse me. In terms of the limitations, and we worked with DBI to address some of the causes of why the ordinances don't seem to be enforced to the extent that they should be. And in many cases, as mentioned, we think the owners are not registering. The department does not have a proactive program or approach to identify the buildings and contact the owners to ensure that they register their properties and pay their annual fees. So as mentioned, the most common source of information about the properties is neighbors complaining rather than the owners self-reporting, which is the requirement in the ordinance. In addition to neighbors registering complaints, city employees will sometimes observe the abandoned or vacant property and report it. These could be DBI employees or others who observe it when they're working in the field and report the information to DBI. Another factor is DBI does not monitor the vacancies after they are reported and added to the registries. So there aren't updates in terms of the status of the properties once they have been added to the registry. The low fee collection has the added effect, of course, of not making resources available to expand or enhance the program. So while we believe DBI could extend some more proactive efforts to reach out to owners or identify other properties, that does take resources, but there's a source of resources, which is the fees. So there's sort of a circular problem here, and the program needs to be enhanced, and that will generate the fees, which will enable the program to be enhanced. And finally, the registries are not posted online, so there are some limitations in terms of the public becoming aware of what properties are registered and whether or not a property they may be aware of is on the registry or not. I should point out DBI has stated that the reason for that is they don't want to make the information available for security purposes, because a vacant, abandoned building could also be attractive to people to get into it for illegal purposes. As Supervisor Yee mentioned, we're not alone in having a problem with commercial vacancies. We did review some other cities and what their vacancy rates are. And this is not dealing with just abandoned and commercial, but commercial vacancies as a whole. In New York, there was a report from last March that recorded a 5 to 20% vacancy rate in various retail corridors throughout the city. What was interesting there is some of the higher rent districts are having higher vacancy rates. And what they're finding is this problem with the retail industry right now in general, which is there aren't enough high-end tenants that want to occupy brick and mortar space any longer. So everyone's waiting for the big tenants, but they're cutting back. Chicago had rates ranging from 3.8 to 14.3% throughout the metro area. It was 10% overall. They did cite rising costs, higher rents as being a hardship on a lot of the businesses who are still subject to the same industry changes previously mentioned. And then the 24 commercial corridors tracked by OEWD here in San Francisco, just for comparison, range from 1.3 to 16.9%, with West Portal's retail area being the lowest, and Visitation Valley, Leland Street, I believe it was, being the highest at 16.9%. We also reviewed some of the approaches being used in other cities. In Chicago, there's sort of a two-pronged approach. One is economic development and funding for particularly neighborhoods that have had a hard time filling vacant commercial spaces. It's called the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. They collect money from downtown developers who in exchange get density bonuses, and some of those funds are used to provide capital to businesses in hard-hit neighborhoods. The Retail Thrive Zones is another program, and that involves reduced property taxes for certain businesses that meet hardship criteria, and competitive grants to enable them to repair or improve their properties to enable them to be occupied again. But on the enforcement side, Chicago also has a more stringent registration and fee program than we see here. There, they require fees to be paid every 6 months on vacant or abandoned property. Here, we are on a 1-year cycle. And also, the fees are higher if the vacancy is not reported by the property owner. So if it comes in from a complaint from neighbors, as we see happens here frequently with DBI, then the fee is higher for the building owner. And if they are cited for repeat building code violations, the fee is also higher in Chicago. Washington, D.C. has a similar approach where there is higher fees charged for properties that are vacant or blighted. They tack a surtax onto the property tax, which of course is not something the city of San Francisco can touch because of state law limitations, but it's just pointing out that some cities are using an approach of disincentives for leaving properties vacant or abandoned. And Dallas, the city of Dallas and the state of Michigan have both adopted acquisition programs or land banks where they acquire and hold properties through the foreclosure process. And if they've been vacant or abandoned, then they take possession of them and turn them over for uses that fulfill their economic development objectives. Finally, Seattle, and I think Supervisor Yee, you mentioned that, and that's an interesting case, and this is probably dealing with the broader issue of commercial vacancies, but like San Francisco, they have had a lot of requirements in their planning and zoning codes to, particularly for multi-story residential buildings, to have retail uses on the ground floor. And we have, of course, those requirements in San Francisco as well. They are removing many of those requirements or making them more flexible so that other uses could go in, including housing on the ground floor, childcare on the ground floor, and other uses. And I think it's an acknowledgement of the process of the fact that building owners cannot fill all the available space in these residential towers. And I know just around City Hall here, you see it in many of the new buildings being built. There is space reserved for retail on the ground floor, and it's empty and has been sitting empty for months and months, if not longer. This issue has come up several times here in San Francisco. The Planning Commission did consider, for example, a proposal to allow retail space in a building in Union Square to be converted to office. It was ultimately denied, but the proposal was made and considered. There was a decision made by the Planning Commission and approved by the Board of Supervisors last July to expand the definition of neighborhood commercial districts and make it easier to open child care without conditional use permits. And that includes using what has previously been ground floor retail space for that purpose. And the Planning Department's Central SOMA Plan and Implementation Strategy includes proposals to require smaller ground floor retail spaces in Central SOMA, and that would allow for a mix of retail uses and types. Right now, there are certain size requirements that may be inappropriate now that that the retail market is changing so much, and different types of businesses and different types of spaces are needed to fulfill the changing requirements of the industry. So we include a number of policy options in our report. Here they are. The Board of Supervisors could enhance funding for the existing small business programs, again, the OEWD programs. We did, as I mentioned, look at all of them. We couldn't put them all together to determine which ones in particular have resulted in occupying a previously vacant or commercial space. But we know that's the objective of a lot of their programs. So we think combined with some additional performance metrics, that's something the board could consider for additional funding if the programs are proving effective. Another is for the board to consider requesting the Planning Department and the Planning Commission to consider and report back on possible zoning and planning code changes to allow for more flexible use of commercial spaces. Another is to suggest to DBI that they improve their outreach on the vacant and abandoned building and commercial storefront ordinances so that owners are more aware of the requirements and that they can also help reduce barriers for the public and city employees to report on vacant and abandoned commercial properties. The existing ordinance could be amended by the Board of Supervisors to raise fees and penalties, similar to what I was pointing out in both Chicago and Washington, D.C., where there are variable fees, and if owners aren't registering or are keeping their property vacant for prolonged periods of time, higher fees could be attached. Right now, it's a flat fee for all properties, regardless of the conditions. Another is that the city require, in combination with DBI, to access the information that's compiled by the U.S. Postal Service. I mentioned that they do compile that information, but it's a rich source of information that could finally give the city a citywide database on commercial properties that would be extremely useful in monitoring the situation and how it's changing over time. And finally, that the board could request that DBI make the vacant building and commercial storefront registries publicly available. We think that would help get the public more involved in reporting and monitoring vacant commercial properties in their neighborhoods. So that is the summary of the report. Christina Malamet, who worked on the report, also is here, and we're available to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that overview. I know that our office worked a lot on the registry issue, given that, sure, a law was passed, but we did also notice that it wasn't really actually updated as well. And I think as we go on into our other presentations, one of my observations now is that even if we were to have this wonderfully filled database of all the vacancies, that still might not address the issues that we're dealing with in terms of the changing nature of retail. So I really like the suggestions that were offered in this report. Supervisor Fewer?
Thank you very much. I just have one question. You mentioned that the City of Chicago charges a vacancy property registration fee every 6 months. A property is vacant, with higher fees charged if the property is reported by complaint rather than self-reported by the owner.
Correct. That's correct.
I'm wondering, has the City of Chicago experienced a decline in vacant storefronts since it has implemented higher fees on properties that were not self-reported, to see if it's had any impact?
Yeah. We do not have information looking at it over time, Supervisor. We got a point in time and saw that they still have a problem also. But the interesting question would be to see if fewer are being reported by complaint, and we can get that information, but I don't have it on hand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And seeing no other questions or comments, thank you to the Budget Analyst Office. I will now turn this over to the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and they have a presentation on neighborhood retail and strategies for storefront vacancies. So
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Tang, committee members Kim Safai, and Supervisors Fewer, Yi, and Supervisors Yi and Stephanie. My name is Joaquin Torres. I'm the Deputy Director at the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. Thank you very much for including OEWD in today's informational hearings about these two items, our recently completed neighborhood retail study, and our strategies for addressing storefront and other commercial vacancies in our neighborhood. Today we'll be co-presenting, or I'll be co-presenting with my colleague Amy Cohen, who managed the retail study project at our office, and with our retail study consultant Sarah Graham from Strategic Economics. Our joint presentation will start with an overview of national retail trends and key findings from our recently completed study by Strategic Economics. And this information will help the city departments, policymakers, and the public understand the current landscape that retail and neighborhood commercial districts are working within. The retail study reviews current research and best practices, which will help inform and guide our policies and programs so we may better support our storefront businesses and neighborhood shopping districts informed by the notable shifts in the national retail sector and local economy. Amy and I will also share afterwards OEWD's goals, strategies, and considerations in support of vibrant neighborhood commercial districts and how we work to prevent and manage storefront vacancies. Aaron Starr from the Planning Department will provide an overview of its tools as well that relate to storefronts. We will close with considerations and next steps. So thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon. As mentioned, I'm Sarah Graham. I'm with Strategic Economics. We're an urban economics consulting firm located in Berkeley. And I'm going to be going over the findings from our forthcoming report of State of the Retail Sector, Challenges and Opportunities for San Francisco's Neighborhood Commercial Districts. And you've no doubt seen headlines about the current challenges the retail sector is facing. And these headlines and concerns about how national retail trends could impact us here in San Francisco were one of the motivating issues that, led to this study. So other motivating issues are about the specific challenges faced by local businesses and how businesses and NCDs may need to adapt to remain competitive in the changing retail environment. So to explore these issues, we have prepared a study that includes 3 issue briefs and a related executive summary. I think you may have the executive summary in front of you today, but the report is forthcoming later this month. The focus of the study, it looked at the types of uses that typically occupy ground floor retail space in the corridors, in the NCDs. So we didn't focus in on everything else in those corridors and everything that goes into commercial space, but rather focused on traditional retail, restaurants, nightlife and entertainment, and personal services and fitness centers. So the conclusions to the study that I'll be getting to in this presentation reflect the changes that are occurring and the uses that are going into those spaces and corridors now under current conditions. So probably the big trend that has been making headlines is store closures. You've probably seen articles talking about all of the major retailers that closing, but it turns out that the story is actually quite a bit more complicated than that, and that there are a lot of stores closing, especially in categories like apparel, electronics, office supply, and department stores. Other types of stores are actually seeing continued growth and store openings. So stores like discount retailers like dollar stores, discount clothing stores, and warehouse stores have actually been adding stores, and sales at restaurants and bars also continue to grow. And the other big trend that has been making a lot of headlines is nationally online sales are driving retail growth. So, and not only driving the growth, but expanding into new categories. It used to be that we thought of online sales as being, Amazon was a bookseller, but we all know that that's actually expanded into a lot of different categories now, and that online retailers are taking on a growing portion of growth. So in 2016, what we call non-store sales, and so this is a big term basically to refer to anything bought online and some other things, but those non-store sales accounted for 12% of total national retail sales. But more than 50% of recent growth in retail has been happening online. So it's a small segment to date, but it is taking up a lot of the growth, and it is the segment that's growing fastest. The influence of e-commerce is also playing out in employment, where national retail employment has been flat, but e-commerce employment is growing. And along with this is changing technology that has been influencing how traditional retail is occurring. So retailers, restaurant owners, and service providers are integrating their brick and mortar sales and locations with online sales strategies. And you see this if you order food on a third-party delivery app or if you use a online booking platform for restaurant reservations. And the final trend that I'm going to talk about today is the growing importance of offering an experience, or what is sometimes referred to as experiential retail. Households in the US are spending more and more on eating out, fitness, beauty, and travel. So retailers have been looking for ways to appeal to this increased emphasis on experience by doing things like holding classes and events or serving food and drinks in a retail location. And on the slide here, we have a couple examples of this in San Francisco retailers. On the left is a store called Bird and Beckett with a music event. It's a record and bookstore. And on the right is San Francisco with another event where people are encouraged to come for the event, but these types of events draw in shoppers for the event, hopefully to also purchase. So then I'm going to move on to the impact of these national trends on San Francisco retail. And I'm going to start with the good news first. And the good news is that so far, San Francisco has been somewhat insulated from the national trends in retail. And this buffering is in part due to our many competitive advantages in San Francisco. And these advantages include the really strong economy, a local culture that places high value on buying local and on dining out, and strong tourism trends. However, recently, sales in the general consumer goods categories and some other categories have been leveling off and even declining in the most recent periods for which data is available. So we see that the retail sector in San Francisco now appears to be slowing. Other indications of this are we've heard from brokers that rents for commercial space in the NCDs have plateaued after years of increased rents. They've now at least leveled off, if not declined in some places. And also that fewer traditional retailers are seeking space in retail districts. And to counter this, there has been an increase in interest from personal services, restaurants, and medical services or offices, but brokers are reporting a decline in traditional retail seeking space. As was mentioned in the previous presentation, OEWD surveys 24 corridors biannually looking at vacancies, and those surveys also show an increase in vacancies in some corridors. And OEWD staff is actually going to provide more detail on this in a following presentation. In addition to these pressures, these national trends and other pressures on local retail, there are other challenges for San Francisco businesses. The challenges that we found in talking to retailers, to businesses here in San Francisco and through the research include employee recruitment and retention and high labor costs, the high rents in many of the NCDs, the loss of longtime customers as households move out of the neighborhood or even out of the city altogether, and also land use regulations and permitting requirements. Some of these, and public realm challenges as well. So those include challenges like real and perceived feelings around safety and cleanliness, long-term vacancies, the perception of vacancies, how they look on a corridor, and other factors that may contribute to a sense of disinvestment. Some of these challenges are consequences of land use regulations, and sometimes they have intended consequences and unintended consequences, and that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. As I mentioned, we talked to retailers here in San Francisco, and we also looked at how in other places retailers are adapting to the challenges. And in response to the rising costs and increasingly competitive retail market, some businesses are adopting creative strategies in an effort to expand sales, reduce their costs, or diversify their revenue streams. And these strategies include developing a stronger presence on social media and experimenting with ways to provide customers with a more interesting experience. And many businesses are thriving using these strategies, and there may be policies and programs to support business owners by providing technical expertise or financial resources. But some businesses don't want to change. They've been in their business forever, and they may not want to change, or they may not be able to overcome fundamental challenges like a lack of sufficient market demand for what they're selling or their services. And that brings us to assisting individual businesses is not enough. It's actually the district, the importance of the district really influences the success of businesses. So we found that retail businesses function as part of the neighborhood commercial districts, and they rely on each other and on other uses in the district to generate foot traffic in a way that cannot be accomplished by themselves through individual marketing or even through really sound business operations. So customers may come to an NCD to go grocery shopping or to eat lunch or get a haircut, and then they may stay and shop at other stores while they're there. And so each individual business can provide some of the foot traffic that helps support other businesses. Other drivers of retail demand include local employers, people on their break at work, and cultural, educational, and medical institutions, professional services, medical, and other offices. So I'm now going to move into the conclusions to our study, and so based on the research and interviews, we've developed 4 main conclusions with related implications, and that will wrap me up. So we have these 4. Then the number 1 conclusion is to thrive in a more challenging business environment, retailers need to embrace new technologies. And I've mentioned several of these technologies already today, and they include online sales, social media, and app-based delivery services. This means that businesses may benefit from technical and financial support in expanding their online presence, adjusting their inventories, or adjusting to a changing customer base. In addition, the city's curb management policies may need to be revisited to maintain and enhance customer access and effectively manage competing transportation needs while enabling businesses to take advantage of emerging delivery technologies. And I believe there are some pilot projects already maybe looking at that. The second main conclusion is that retailers need to be flexible and creative to provide customers with a more interesting experience. Examples of this are offering classes and workshops, hosting events, and serving food and beverages at stores. And these events draw shoppers into the stores, as I mentioned before. This conclusion means that land use policies may need to be modified to provide retailers more flexibility so that they can experiment with combining uses and expanding services, like serving food and drinks in a retail setting. The third conclusion is about the importance of the district. Diversifying the mix of uses in an NCD can help retailers expand their customer base. The right mix really depends on the NCD or the corridor or the specific district, but components of a healthy mix include an anchor that drives foot traffic to the district. And an anchor could be a full-service grocery store or another large retailer, or it could be a cluster of smaller stores, related retail stores, or restaurants, some sort of use that's a little cluster. Other businesses in a healthy mix include restaurants, nightlife, and entertainment that complement retail sales and provide gathering spaces for potential customers, and personal services and fitness centers that provide needed services and also help to draw foot traffic. Professional services provide needed services in an office-like setting directly to the general public, but even uses like office and housing that may not directly serve the general public help generate foot traffic and demand for retail and NCDs. So what all this means, diversifying the mix of uses in an NCD can help retailers expand their customer base, is that new ground floor retail should include a range of storefront sizes, and storefronts should be designed to maximize marketability and be adaptable to the needs of a diverse set of retailers or restaurants or maybe even other uses. It also means that office and housing uses that may not be open to the general public could be located above the ground floor or even on the ground floor in weaker market locations, such as on the periphery of an NCD. Limiting ground floor retail requirements for new development to the strongest locations for retail could also help reduce potential vacancies. So we've heard a lot today about vacancies, and the work that we did suggests that limiting ground floor retail requirements could help to reduce those vacancies in the future. The final conclusion for our study is around experiential retail and the experience of people visiting our NCDs. By offering an attractive, fun shopping and dining experience, NCDs can help retailers continue to draw foot traffic. This means that continuing to maintain and enhance the public realm is critical, so prioritizing pedestrian comfort and safety, keeping public spaces accessible and attractive, can help to draw customers to an area and keep them there to make purchases. Also, as we have seen in NCDs in San Francisco, celebrating local historical and cultural assets can contribute to a unique and interesting environment. So programming, festivals, and events can draw people into the NCDs as well. And finally, high-capacity district management organizations can help districts to create a great experience for residents and visitors. So these types of organizations include community benefit districts, merchants associations, community development corporations, and other types of management organizations. And I believe with that, I'm going to pass it back to Joaquin now.
Sure. So per the request, we wanted to go over some of Invest in Neighborhoods and OEWD's programs to support commercial districts and our small businesses. But first, we wanted to have a common definition of vacancy. But first, I just want to recognize that we're all talking about the commercial districts, supporting them, their vibrancy, their economic vitality, the meaning of these spaces to the public, and what they have to offer all of us, whether we're visitors, residents, or workers. And of course, one indicator that we all commonly accept as a metric of a healthy district is commercial vacancy. So I wanted to define it in terms of what you see in front of you. A vacant storefront is empty with no identified future occupant. It may be under construction or it's occupied with a non-commercial use. As has been mentioned, beginning in 2013, our staff conducted biannual physical storefront vacancy surveys. We're out there pounding the pavement as part of our program. And we want to also say that while we recognize that these underutilized spaces, such as which may not be open on a regular or daily basis, those are not counted as vacancies. Those are counted as being occupied from our point of view. But we also want to recognize that even though they are not technically vacant, they certainly do have an impact on community perception in a neighborhood. What is a healthy vacancy from our perspective? Economic development specialists typically use 5 to a 10% range to determine whether or not there is a healthy or normal level of retail vacancies. That said, the perception of whether or not there is a vacancy problem in a particular neighborhood, commercial district can vary. The numbers have value, as does each district's population based on their priorities and circumstances. Sometimes, even when the vacancy rate is within a healthy range, neighborhood stakeholders are concerned about vacancy. What you see here is that the citywide vacancy rate has stayed low, even through the recession beginning in 2000 or coming out of it in 2009. As the Bay Area economy began growing out of the recession, increased demand for retail space created competition, and we can also see rents growing quite quickly in certain spaces. The retail vacancy rate in San Francisco as of the third quarter of last year was 3.2%. And there has been a modest increase in that vacancy rate since 2015. This graph, I think, also provides some context for our concern when vacancies in a neighborhood get too high, as well as if they are too low. When vacancies are under 5%, we worry about those rents, as you see here, rising, and a lack of spaces for some needed change that we like to see over time in a corridor. Now, in terms of just the category of vacancies, what we define vacancies in two specific ways, either as active or as inactive. Active basically means that we have an existing or identified commercial tenant. An inactive vacancy basically means they're not open yet. They do have an existing or identified tenant, so they can't be leased to someone else. We have historically divided these vacancies into these categories so we can refer businesses looking for space to storefronts that are technically available, even if not proactively being leased. We report biannually on these active vacancies to the Controller's Office. And for the purposes of the retail study and as a way to gauge corridor health, we analyze a combined effect of both these inactive and active vacancies. They both have a value to us in terms of what residents are seeing and experiencing, and also how we decide to work in a given space. It's interesting to note as well that when we began tracking in 2013 to 2016, that active vacancy rate, where we see our programs really having, when packaged and tailored and curated in a way, we can see them having an impact here in terms of the active vacancy rate declining by about 1.7%, whereas citywide, you see those vacancies actually increasing by 0.9%. When we start looking a little closer at the 5 highest neighborhood vacancy rates within our invested neighborhoods portfolio, or the 5 lowest, we can see that some are greater than the healthy or normal range, and also some are very comfortable. But the average generally is within that healthy range. And I'm going to ask Amy Cohen to come up right now to talk about some of the factors that contribute to those vacancies.
Good afternoon. The BLA report started to identify some of the causes of vacancies in San Francisco, and we just wanted to try to describe it in a very colorful picture quickly. And in our experience, this office has done a lot of work filling vacancies and doing more comprehensive commercial corridor work, in particular in low-income neighborhoods, but also in moderate and higher-income neighborhoods around the city. And we wanted to just share our experience, which is that at the very core of this picture that I'm calling an onion is the building owner. And the owner may have investors. And anything that you do to try to fill a vacancy, it comes down to the owner and their motivation. And so if they are not motivated or able to lease the space, it's very challenging. A couple of the other factors as you work out from there involve brokers who may or may not work for an owner and who have varying motivations, such as around rents. If they think that they could get a higher rent, they might hold out whether or not the owner, is sort of aware of what the considerations are. The next layer out is really the building conditions, and I don't have to say much about that, but they can be an insurmountable challenge. Even if the owner's motivated, if they have a long deferred maintenance on an old building, they just simply might not have the capital, or sometimes they or the business owner has the capital, but then encounters something else as they've already gotten into the process, and then they can't afford to move forward. The neighborhood conditions have been talked about a lot today. These influence some retail more than others. Many businesses want to gravitate toward where other businesses like them are successful, or where there's a lot of spending power or high income or density to be the spending power. And many of the businesses that are only reliant or very much reliant on foot traffic are very sensitive to challenges in safety and cleanliness, or other challenges like parking. The city regulations and processes hit both the neighborhood side and the business side. Again, I don't think these are new issues, but at the building level, there's a lot of regulations to navigate. And at the neighborhood level, there may be use restrictions, some of which are intended to prevent certain kinds of businesses from coming in, but others which maybe aren't, but are hard for a prospective business and landlord to understand. Sometimes people sign leases not understanding what the restrictions are or what the process would be, adding a lot of time and cost. And then a prospective tenant's ability to navigate all of this is another challenge, and some of them have a lot more capacity than others, and some are only going to have the motivation if there's a very high demand and very big payoff for them to go and open. And this is why we see formula retail sometimes being more able to navigate processes because they have the corporate high tie-in and support. And then finally, at the outside of this is all of the trends in retail generally, which we've been talking about today. So I just wanted to let you know that we have experiences trying to deal with all of these different layers, but it takes a lot of time and understanding to know where the hurdles are, and a lot of relationship building and a lot of infrastructure with community partners, brokers, and everyone else. So I think that with that, I'm going to turn it back.
I just heard that the definition I provided might have been captured incorrectly on the closed caption. So active vacancies are defined as those which do not have an existing or identified commercial tenant. Do not. In terms of the programs that we provide to support both our corridors and our small businesses, of course, Invest in Neighborhoods is there to focus specifically on both small businesses, but also the targeted neighborhood commercial district. Our programs are designed and deployed based on significant conversations with community around their priorities and desires, both our internal and external capacity, the resources that we have available to support both business services and neighborhood improvement projects. All of those are aimed at realizing an economically thriving, safe, resilient, sustainable district that meets the needs of our local residents. Some of our services are available citywide, when others are tailored to a more specific neighborhood's needs, when we are looking to concentrate and prioritize our efforts. At the time right now, we have begun looking through an equity lens in terms of communities that may be most in need and that have been reaching out to us for a diversity of services where we can invest our time and our resources. In those targeted commercial districts, we partner with community board of supervisor members and our other partner city agencies. And through that, we have opportunities to develop, package, deploy, select services to address the particular needs of that district. The ability of us to track those vacancies and that detail of data that we shared is a direct result of our Invest in Neighborhoods program. As we track vacancies and make neighborhood improvement programs available and to refine new programs to meet the needs of our small business and neighborhood stakeholders, we have employed various tools to prevent and both fill vacancies. Here you'll see when we think about the space as a whole, the commercial district planning and management that we do in support of economic development plans, the powerful work that our community benefit districts provide in terms of both a heightened level of services and also a sustainable, committed level of resources based on the work that they do. The importance of our merchant associations and our nonprofits who work towards capacity building to make sure that community members are well supported and informed in what the city can do in partnership with them in service of their neighborhoods. Cultural district planning, based on what we've seen very positively achieved in Japantown and through the Calle 24 Latino Cultural District, in addition to the Japantown Cultural Heritage and Economic Sustainability Strategy. District marketing assistance, because creating that experience for folks and reminding them that experiences can be had in our neighborhoods can be a very powerful tool, both to celebrate the identity of a given place, but also to remind people of the specialness of any given district. And then also finally, public realm enhancements and our neighborhood improvement grants go a long way to supporting those efforts in beautification, activation, events that are of importance to the community. We want to make sure as well, when you deal with individual businesses, that our small businesses can stay open, that they can expand in the city and be successful. And as we develop our programs, we attempt to develop them with the various stages of development of any individual business in mind, meaning that we want flexible programs that can support a business that's starting up. And or is opening multiple other locations in the city, or is thinking about other plans that they may want to make. In this slide, there are various services focused on helping small businesses develop healthier business practices and operations, whether in dealing with substantive issues around access through the ADA program, whether it's around construction impacts, which we've come to this body before about, and finding ways to alleviate them in the best way that we can to deal with those issues. Or in the cases of most recently, a West Portal fire or fires in Chinatown or in the Mission, having a disaster recovery program that can act more nimbly, faster to support those businesses. In addition, given the rising real estate prices and economic pressures that so many of us have been encountering throughout the city, we wanted to make sure that we were being particular about how we look at retaining and relocating when necessary businesses that are of importance to us, both from an individual perspective, but also for the overall health of the local economy. Our access to capital programs also support that in terms of providing low-interest loans to communities in a culturally competent way as well, and also focusing in those areas where we want to see investment increasing, whether we talk about the Bayview, the Tenderloin, or other neighborhoods. And also to support that are SF Shines facade and tenant improvement programs, which can go a long way in being a useful incentive in partnering small businesses and property owners for the benefit of our communities. Some of those same tools can actually be used to attract businesses. And at OEWD, we have also an array of initiatives that also support these efforts. Whether we have target sector attraction services, when we talk about trying to attract grocery stores or particular restaurants or nightlife to a neighborhood, arts, nonprofits, production, distribution, and repair businesses, catalyst properties that we can focus on that have historic and cultural significance to the community and it's viewed as an asset. Those loan programs can go a long way in terms of drawing someone who may not have been inclined to consider a certain neighborhood when packaged with a facade improvement program, and also the assurance that the bureaucracy can support them through that process. And as we've done since 2016 with our Small Business Acceleration Program, serving over 160 businesses, we've certainly seen some success there. We still have a long way to go, but it's a great, great start for us in supporting those businesses. And now to talk about the Planning Department, I wanted to invite up Aaron Starr from the Planning Department.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs for the Planning Department. I'm going to go over the main tools that planning has that shape our retail corridors, some of which I'm sure you're already very familiar with. These tools can be used to either encourage or discourage certain uses and help shape a more inviting commercial spaces, and corridors. So the first tool is the individually named neighbor commercial districts. There are two types of NC districts in the city. There's general neighbor commercial districts like NC 1, 2, and 3, and there are individually named NC districts like the Noriega Street, Excelsior Outer Mission Street, and Folsom Street NCT districts. Unlike general NC districts, individual named NC districts allow the city to tailor those controls to specific needs of each district. Each NC district has its own unique set of strengths and challenges. Therefore, there's often not one solution for all districts. Next, we have vertical zoning controls, which control uses by floor. Vertical zoning controls are utilized more in the city's NC districts, although they are currently used to a lesser extent in the other zoning districts like our downtown shopping district, or C3R, and our residential commercial, or RC districts. This type of zoning control can be used to encourage more active commercial uses on the ground floor and less active uses on the second and third floors, depending on how they're crafted. Next, we have our formula retail controls, which primarily serve to preserve the unique aesthetic character of our NC districts. Per voter mandate, these controls require any store with 11 or more locations worldwide seek conditional use authorization. Certain districts have taken these controls further by prohibiting formula retail outright or prohibiting certain types of formula retail, like formula retail restaurants. The approval process can also be used to encourage or discourage certain types of uses. Principally, permitting a use allows it to establish without Planning Commission approval, while conditional use authorization and mandatory discretionary review provide added layers of review and require Commission approval. Three-told notification is typically required when one use is being changed to another specified use in Section 316, like restaurants or schools, and this requires that a notice go out to neighbors within 150 feet of the change of use, and that lasts for 30 days. This tool is primarily used in NC districts and Eastern Neighborhoods mixed-use districts, however, is also used citywide for cannabis retail. It's important to keep in mind, though, that conditional use approval and mandatory discretionary review are really only effective in ensuring that a proposed use is appropriate at a particular location. An approval for any use is carried with the land. The focus is often on the operator of the establishment during commission hearings, though once a use is established, the operator may change without any Planning Commission review. We also have our storefront development regulations, which include design guidelines, street frontage and transparency requirements, non-residential use size limits, active commercial use requirements, and a ground floor 5-foot height bonus. These code requirements seek to ensure that storefronts remain attractive, pedestrian-oriented, and fit within the scale and character of a neighborhood. These same controls can also benefit retail operations by allowing open, bright, and inviting retail spaces to be included in new development. I'd also like to clarify that about the active commercial use requirement. While we require active uses on the ground floor in our NC districts, only certain streets or segments of streets require active commercial uses, and these don't necessarily have to be retail. Another tool we have to preserve commercial corridor character and our unique storefronts in San Francisco is our Historic Preservation Review. Typically done as part of our CEQA review, historic preservation ensures that modifications to bring storefronts up to modern codes and expectations are done in a sensitive manner. And then finally, we have our accessory use controls. Accessory uses are considered to be a related minor use that is necessary to the operation or enjoyment of a lawful principal use, or appropriate, incidental, and subordinate to any such use. Currently, accessory uses are limited to 1/3 of the floor area unless it's a catering use where the product is sold on site. In that instance, there is no floor area limitation. Expanding the definition of what an accessory use can be is one avenue that could be explored to allow businesses more flexibility in how to operate. However, currently we do allow multiple uses in one storefront, even if they don't meet the definition of an accessory use, as long as they are permitted as an individual use on that site. And that concludes my segment. Thank you.
I'm just going to close real quick. So we tried to package all of the potential implications of what you've heard today, both the trends in national retail, the local challenges, and some of the concerns that have come up about either programs or neighborhoods. And so we just wanted to kind of summarize these, and then we'll tell you about next steps and open it up for Q&A. We think that there should be some shifts in how we support neighborhood commercial districts as a city. And we have come, with planning prepared to look at our programs and look at our tools. So the first category we think should be looked at is small business technical assistance, and to really look at how do we support businesses in tooling up to be able to use technology for everything they do. That's in particular something we could look at. In our neighborhood commercial district programs, we feel that there might be a way to amplify some of the tools that we already have to support neighborhood commercial district capacity to promote and market their area, to care for the public realm, and to activate public space. We think that there should be some changes potentially with storefront development regulations and design guidelines, and Aaron just gave a couple examples of some of the ways that those affect small businesses in commercial districts. Particularly looking at more flexibility in some areas is one of the implications of our study about what goes in the ground floor, and reducing barriers to combining uses within a storefront, the accessory use. We didn't spend much time talking about curb management policy, but clearly there's a lot of competing pressures on curbs, and so we need to keep in mind the overall health of the corridor and the needs of small businesses. And we would be open to working with the MTA and the small business community to think through how these pressures and major transit improvement projects taken together should lead to some changes. And then finally, the potential for changes in the DBI program that has been presented today. We have a hearing on the retail study at the Small Business Commission next week, and planning has a commission hearing on the study on February 22nd. Each of our agencies is willing to go and take a look more deeply at our programs. I think we'll just open it up for questions now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you to all the departments for the presentation. And now, colleagues, Supervisor Yee.
I have a couple of questions. I think one of the things that we mentioned here, and there wasn't much of a report on it, but in regards to the DBI, to identify and implement vacancy enforcement programs, I mean, we already have some regulations or some enforcement programs that we supported, and it seems like we're having a hard time enforcing it. Is there somebody from DBI here? Can you respond to that piece, because it seems like there's a lot more vacancy, and I don't quite understand what the problem is in terms of enforcing.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Ron Tom, Assistant Director, Department of Building Inspection. To answer your question, Supervisor Yee, the enforcement of this program, holistically, all vacant buildings, including residential and commercial, in our department is complaint-driven. We do not have a database, and we do not have a system that is able to capture it beyond the ability that we have in an Excel program. Having said that, we are in the process of implementation of a major change in our department with a new permit and project tracking system, which most of the supervisors here have heard of. And the go-live date is right after Labor Day this year, September. So perhaps that's one of the avenues we can exercise in terms of enhancing the enforcement capabilities of the department. The staff that has been in charge of the program since its inception, especially we're talking about the commercial storefronts, has been reassessed recently. The Department of Building Inspection Code Enforcement section is under the charge of the Deputy Director of Inspections. He's not be here today because he happened to be on vacation. So I'm here to speak on his behalf and for the department. One of the things we can bring back to the department are a lot of the suggestions that have been made through the controller's office, through the OEWD, and integration of those into a more comprehensive approach to enforcement. Having said that, we will also need to assess the staffing resources we have. That, like all departments, can be somewhat challenging at times, but that's something we'll have to deal with by looking forward and looking holistically at this program.
So I'm a little confused. Is this staffing challenges you have at DBI, or is it we're not getting very many complaints? Or I mean, if maybe you don't have any staffing challenges, if you're saying that every complaint that has been made has been have been inspected and assessed in regards to the validity of the complaint.
That is a correct statement, Supervisor. When we take the complaints, we have a complaint tracking system that we currently are able to utilize. And ultimately, it results in either an abatement because there's no foundation for the complaint, or the complaint is valid and we proceed with the abatement process. That includes a notice of violation after an inspector is deployed to go out to the site where the complaint is registered for that address specifically, and then the process of researching ownership and things of that nature are underway. And ultimately, it results in a public hearing that we call a director's hearing at the department.
Thank you. Supervisor, if I could chime in real quick again, because our office spent quite a bit of time. We were also frustrated as a result of the legislation passing. And what we did was we actually had our own staff go out to all of our District 4 corridors and document every single vacancy in District 4 and then turn over an Excel list. And so, but because the list is not public, I can't tell if it's actually being enforced upon or whatnot by DBI. The issue with OEWD is that they only focus on certain number of corridors, not every single one. So we had originally asked for the two departments to cross-share information. I think that's a great starting point, if that's even happening. I'm not sure. But I would say that I think moving forward, I think what I'm hearing from Supervisor Yee as well is that we really need all the different enforcing departments to actually go and do that work. I mean, I can do this for a limited period of time, but I want to make sure that 10 years out, 20 years out, that this program and our ability to track vacancies is still there, regardless if I'm here and tracking it on my own at this great detail. We as a city as a whole should be doing more of that, and it should be more systematic. I am very worried about the permit tracking system that's being developed at DBI. I think we've heard for years that it's coming online, so I don't want us to just hinge it upon, well, it'll go live in September, because I don't know if it will. Right. So anyway, I hope that addresses kind of the frustrations that we've had on this legislation for years now.
No, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this. I guess I'm beginning to be getting to your level of frustration with this. And when it comes to staffing, then if it's staffing, it seems like DBI has the ability to staff up if they really wanted to. They certainly have the revenue source to do that. Thank you very much. Hopefully we could hear maybe sometime this year the results of their efforts. I have one other question I'd like to ask. This for city planning. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I'm interested in some zoning changes that would make it easier to do certain things, and hopefully we can start seeing fewer of these commercial spaces empty. And one of them, as I mentioned, is in regards to childcare. But I guess my question really is in regards to what Seattle did, for instance, or other cities where they changed the zoning to be a little more flexible. Do you know if they've been successful in reducing the percentage of vacant commercial spaces?
I don't I'm sorry, I don't have that information with me, but we can look into it and see other cities that perhaps have similar zoning controls with us that have relaxed them. I think Seattle did that as was presented. I do know that San Francisco does have a very fine-grained planning code, more so than other cities, where we really look at individual uses very carefully. So we're unique in that respect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Fewer.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just have a couple of questions. So from OEWD, I'm wondering, how do you inform commercial property owners of programs that benefit small business owners? And to what extent is that method effective?
In terms of property owners, it depends on the district in which we're working. If we're talking about a community benefit district, we tend to work with the leadership there to connect them with the programs that are available. In terms of the job squad, who actually goes out there on a quarterly and biannual basis to actually walk the corridor and get that information to make sure that businesses or business owners are aware of the services that we provide, we're very proactive about that. It's part of the core functions of the job squad.
So you actually go out to the corridor and engage?
Out door to door and talk individually with business owners, in addition to getting an assessment of the building stock itself, its vacancy or type of vacancy that it is as well, and that one-on-one interaction with merchants and community members.
And so you actually keep data on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the data we presented.
We're able to see it through our commercial corridors?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I wanted to know what efforts is this department taking to reach out to property owners who conduct businesses in languages other than English? Because I noticed that some of our merchant associations in my district do not reach out to primarily Russian-speaking or Chinese-speaking or Vietnamese-speaking or Thai-speaking or Korean-speaking. And so I'm wondering about your department. How do you reach out to those property owners?
Certainly. That is one of the next steps holistically among monolingual communities that we would like to expand, depending on what the linguistic characteristics are of any given corridor, as opposed to the characteristics of an entire community. At the same time, I think one of the things I'm very proud of is that we do have a very strong bilingual staff, Spanish, Chinese, Mandarin, Cantonese, Shanghainese. I'm trying to think if I'm missing any other languages. I don't have my report in front of me, but we certainly do ensure that we provide that proactively.
Because I see in my commercial corridors that it is those business owners actually that struggle the most with newer regulations that they have to comply by. Also, relocation costs, just the nuts and bolts of running a small business in really a competitive retail environment. And I think that they are the ones actually who really don't have access to a lot of mainstream information. And so so I also wanted to know what kind of measures are taken to accurately record the efficacy of your programs.
Certainly. I mean, I think it's based on the number of clients that are served, but I think we need to be fine-grained about that as well. It's one thing when we're outreaching to businesses, and whether it's monolingual communities or otherwise, and whether they actually decide to take up the services that we can provide. That's actually one of the difficulties that we have right now, specifically with monolingual community members or low income, or small businesses at large for that matter, in terms of we can come to them and we can make the resources available and the education available. Sometimes for a diversity of reasons, they may choose not to take the next step. I think one measure that we want to begin taking on is what level among those populations can we increase the receptiveness to those programs.
Have you ever discussed having satellite sort of storefront resource centers for small businesses along commercial corridors?
Absolutely. So that's actually two entities provide that function for us. Both a job squad in terms of being present and actually holding workshops, in being present and letting business owners know of workshops that are available if the need is raised to us. For example, in Chinatown in the past, when there were issues related to the Department of Public Health, we helped coordinate the appropriate departments to deal with those issues to make sure that it was the cities and its programs could be accessible to that community. As it relates to the Small Business Development Center, which is a partner agency that we host in OEWD, one of the next steps that they want to take is what are the diversity of ways in which they can provide workshops online and test out the ability for that to be absorbed by communities who may or may not be able to access those programs. But we have seen, especially when we talk about the potential for increasing resources or increasing attention related to e-commerce needs for small businesses. One of the hesitations that some have brought up is that would those communities be willing or wanting to or to benefit from that adaptation or those adaptive services? And the answer from our consultants and from our director of the SBDC is absolutely yes. So I think it's something worth trying out so that we can begin doing that and just keeping on building out what our outreach is, the engagement is, in a community and culturally competent based way.
Okay, thanks. And then I just wanted to comment on this healthy range of vacancies. And actually, I think it's somewhat misleading because sometimes there is, and when you identify a healthy range, is that there is a concentration sometimes on 1 or 2 blocks within a corridor. So if you're looking through a whole neighborhood commercial district, you might say, oh, there's a low vacancy rate, but there's a high concentration sometimes within a 3 or 4 block radius. And that is actually what leads to blight, but it also doesn't allow a commercial corridor to meet its potential of vibrancy because we quite frequently in my neighborhood, I just have to say, that we have people who own multiple storefronts on one block, and therefore it really inhibits the ability for that commercial corridor to start to thrive because they own so many storefronts and they're vacant on one block. And so I just think that we should also be calculating a concentration because that has a different sort of negative impact on a commercial corridor.
I think that's very true, which is why when we apply some of our programs in very specific areas, during the presentation I made mention that the data is one thing, but then also the on-the-ground research is another, when coupled with local preferences and community perception about what's important to their neighborhood, the blocks around their house, or where they visit constantly. That's certainly why where we actually place or encourage events to take place is important. It's why that when we couple facade and tenant improvement programs, that we try to cluster them as much as we can. When those are found to be cumbersome, we adapt those programs so we can still pursue that. But absolutely, I think it's the concentration factor is something that we do definitely take into account.
And then I noticed that in this research project that we're doing, I think this is on page 16. It says some of the conclusions, and this is conclusion number 3, implications, is limiting ground floor retail requirements for new development to the strongest locations for retail could help reduce potential vacancies. So could you give me some examples of that?
Certainly. Did you want to? I'm going to ask Sarah Graham to come up from Strategic Economics.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Sarah Graham
Hi.
from Strategic Economics. So in answer to your question, what we're referring to there is new development requirements for ground floor retail. And as you described, some of the corridors or districts might be rather large or several blocks long, and requiring ground floor retail on every piece of that corridor might be too diffuse.
Okay.
So often retail operates as a node, and there may be places in a district that are more strong locations for retail, and perhaps retail could be required in those locations, but in other locations that may be weaker will not be appropriate locations for new retail.
Okay.
Does that explain it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it. Okay. And then I have just another question for OEWD is that when you mentioned that you help with relocation of businesses, so there are businesses in my district where small business owners have been there for 34 years, and now there's a new landlord, and the landlord wants to jack up the rent 5 times what they're paying, and so they have to relocate. But these are stories that are actually on, it's such a fine line to making it every month. I'm wondering, so do you help with relocation costs?
We have not helped with relocation costs, but we do help in terms of both free legal services, in terms of the lease. If you define a relocation as finding a neighborhood where programs could be applied related to facade or tenant improvement to help make shells more warm or to help improve a site for them, we can help them there. We can also help them, linking them up depending on the type of business that it is with our acceleration program to make sure the bureaucracy is working for them so that the time issues that may also rack up additional costs can be accounted for as well and addressed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Stephanie.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair Tang, Supervisor Fewer, Ronan, and Eve for calling this extremely important hearing. I'm glad to be here today, and thank you to the BLA, OEWD, and planning for these presentations. I think it's a really good start. You know, I'm just sitting here thinking over the 17 years I've lived in Cow Hollow, I've seen so many changes in the neighborhood commercial corridors that I rely on. I was thinking about Burton's on Chestnut Street, Kimmel's on Chestnut Street, a Hardware Unlimited on Sacramento Street, and then the loss of our single screen theater on Union Street, the Metro, which we went through a protracted adaptive reuse project that took years when I was an aide, but it's thriving now. But, you know, I just want to say it's not just the loss of goods or services in the store when someone goes out of business, but it's the relationships that develop over time. And these are heartbreaking losses to the community. And, you know, I'm fortunate that in Pacific Heights we have one of the lowest vacancy rates in the city. Chestnut Street is also thriving, but I also represent Sacramento Street and Union Street, which have their own unique challenges. And recently there was a story on Socket Site, and it detailed about 22 vacancies on Union Street. And I would like to just ask OEWD if you have any data on these vacancies, and specifically if you have any data on how long some of these pending new businesses have been stuck in the city's processes while pending approval.
Certainly. We can get you that that information in a more granular way. Right now, I believe that the current vacancy rate for the Union Street area that we cover from Van Ness to Steiner, and then from Fillmore down to Lombard, which is the geography there, is around 7%. 7%, yes. But we can also give you just a full breakdown and briefing on exactly the length of time those vacancies have been in place or not, when the changes happened, when a business may have changed hands, and if it is or is not vacant currently or actually has its doors open for business. Yeah.
And just one more question for DBI. You know, as we're in the budget process right now, I'm just wondering, you know, what type of resources are needed to proactively identify the vacant and abandoned commercial properties, and is DBI taking a look at that right now? I mean, we're in that process, and this is obviously an extremely important issue facing our neighborhood commercial corridors, and just wondering if we could get a sense of what exactly we are looking at and what resources would be needed to tackle this problem.
Having been brought into this issue only at the end of last week, I don't think I have a deep sense of the specificity you would need for our department, from our department. However, I can see, having heard testimony and having read the analyst report, that we are looking to leverage what reports that already are in place. And as was mentioned earlier, the OEWD, the focus on those 24 business corridors would be a starting point to build at least our internal database so that we can make sure that we have within our own staff, give them task charges and try to have measurables available as we progress. So I've already seen that report, and we can see there are, I would identify about 6 corridors that I think should be addressed immediately. Utilizing whether it's OEWD or other resources is to document the ones that are not already in our system. And those would be the ones that were complaint driven. So now we're talking about our staff having to get out there in the neighborhood. And again, it's a challenge for our department because we have a limited number of code enforcement inspectors, and we do have to handle all other code enforcement related cases that have to do with permits that were either exceeded or a permit was never taken out for a project. And we have quite a few complaints that we have to handle on those. I have a sense of what we do because I am a hearing officer for the code enforcement cases. and by and large, majority of them have been and will continue to be related to construction. Construction either exceeding permit scopes or exceeding the description that's provided, or no permits at all. And those are complaint-driven, and that maintains quite a good amount of our staff time being devoted to just handling that. This additional objective that we will place as with the goal of bringing in a better understanding of our enforcement and the efficacy of our enforcement would have to be something we have to ask Deputy Director for Inspection Services to consider. That is not my program. I'm in charge of it. As I said, he's on vacation. But I can bring, this is all available. It's recorded. He will have all this available to him, and our executive team will meet and discuss this and take a look at a holistic approach to this so that we do bring about some changes that are also measurable.
Okay. Oh, another question.
And this is for planning. Just, one more point I just wanted to make is that when I've seen businesses try to go through the CU process, and sometimes it takes so long, and they're paying rent the entire time, and they call us and they're like, can you please get us on the Planning Commission calendar? And just, I'd really like to work on some processes around making sure that they're not waiting and paying rent while we wait for the CU hearing at planning. And if there's any type of processes that we can put in place to fast track that, I think that's something that we really look at.
Yes, Supervisor. That's an often complaint that we have from the supervisor's offices and from applicants. We do have a program called, I think it's CB3P, which is it's a small business program that if you meet certain criteria, we expedite your process through the Planning Commission, through the CU process. Not all uses meet that definition. Like if you're a massage use, we don't expedite those. Formula Retail is not expedited, and there are some local businesses that apply for a franchisee, but they qualify as Formula Retail. So it is a limited program, but we have had some success with it. But yeah, we're always looking for ways to speed that up, especially for smaller businesses.
Okay, thank you. Any other further questions, comments? I think there's a lot of work that we're going to have to do internally on this issue. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to public comment because I know we've got a lot of items behind us. So I'm going to call your names, and if I don't, just come on up and line up. Eileen Boken, Henry Karnolowitz, Mark McHale, Priscilla Wilda, Hans Hansen. Again, anyone who wants to come up and speak, please come to the podium.
Good afternoon, Supervisor. First of all, I'd like to say congratulations to Supervisor Stefani for being appointed to District 2. I think you can do a fabulous job. I'm glad to see you there.
It's actually, Henry, it's actually pronounced Stephanie.
Okay,
Supervisor
sorry.
Stephanie.
Supervisor Stephanie. And second, I'd like to also thank you to OEWD for doing such an excellent job on the report of the status of the retail business in San Francisco. As we all know, for longest time, small business really relied on foot traffic. And with the coming of the online sales, that really had impacted a lot of the small businesses. So, of course, thus your foot traffic has dropped off. So the thing is now, how do you bring foot traffic back in? Well, one of the things is now, if you have vacant storefronts, what they do, they create blight. Not only that, but you don't get the foot traffic you normally would have if you didn't have these blighted places. I was fortunate to be out with Mayor Lee the Friday before he passed away at the Excelsior, and he remarked at the last stop we were at, and said, boy, look at these beautiful storefront windows, how they've decorated them, Couldn't we do this on all the storefronts? So surely, couldn't we work together with OEWD, the Merchant Association, everybody else, to decorate the storefronts, get artists in there, put displays on, and so forth? Now, and I think that would really sort of help. The other thing is to, mind you, the small businesses who are surviving have been very creative, been innovative, because by having music, entertainment, and also by having pop-ups. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Supervisors. My name is Mark McHale, and I represent the Eureka Valley Neighborhood Association, the oldest continuously active neighborhood group in the city. The Castro Business District, which stretches along Market Street from Octavia to Castro and then down to 19th, is a thriving and creative business and residential district, and we are open for business. Despite some of the intense pressures afflicting every neighborhood across our city, we're struggling with a 12 to 13% vacancy rate. With our sister groups, we have been working with various entities in the city government and political marketing. Over the past 5 years, we have addressed and improved many issues facing our neighborhood and commercial district. The truth is we need some sticks to deal with those few owners who are absent and non-responsive. Owners like Les Natali and Veritas LLC are wreaking havoc on our local business landscape. They each have multiple long-term vacant storefronts. The changing nature of commercial property ownership in our neighborhood has shifted from mom-and-pop entities that have deep roots in the community to corporate investors who aren't at all connected to our community. They are often absent and not involved with their properties other than to collect rents and seek the highest rates of return on their investment. These absent corporate owners only respond to numbers and financial stimulus. Aggressive fees and penalties are one of the many tools we need to help restore our beloved neighborhood commercial district. The EV&A strongly supports more meaningful, comprehensive, and aggressive vacancy fees and penalties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Tang, supervisors. My name is Karen Flood. I'm the executive director of the Union Square Business Improvement District, and we look forward to working collaboratively with you on this very important issue. The Union Square bid does provide important services to the area, many of which were mentioned earlier in terms of what a management district does. We daily manage cleaning and safety and social issues on the street. We enhance our public realm to create reasons for people to come downtown and shop. So I really want to thank Supervisors Fewer, Yee, and Ronan for bringing this issue to our attention. This is a really important discussion that we're having today. And also thanks to OEWD, who we work with closely, and DBI for the work that they've done and the studies that we've all done. Union Square is a gateway for 50 million visitors. We create a vibrant hospitality industry downtown, tens of thousands of well-paying jobs, and retail managers take pride in their storefronts, as do property owners, and we want to maintain the area. Overall, the state of retail in Union Square is strong. I believe we're sort of in the 5 to 10% range, although there are pockets of our district, as Supervisor Fewer mentioned earlier, that maybe are more vacant than others. Certainly Sutter and Post on the northern side have more vacancies than the southern part of the district. There are many reasons why stores are vacant, as were also mentioned today, and we've seen that uptick. I mean, sometimes right now, as we're seeing, the trend is for smaller floor plates. We have some of the bigger department stores, of course, in Union Square, and now we need smaller floor plates. So we look forward to working with you on this important issue and like to just continue to be part of the discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Eileen Bogan, President of Speak, here on my own behalf. In the conclusions and implementation section of this presentation, 2 implications stood out, and I quote, "Current management policies may need to be revisited and land use policies may need to be modified," end quote. This suggests that OEWD is promoting current and proposed MTA and planning department policies, some of which are controversial. Regarding the MTA, the Small Business Commission has weighed in on the Mission Street project. From the dais, Commissioner Dooley referred to the MTA as autocratic. Commission President Dwight referred to Muni Forward as an academic exercise. The same could be said of the MTA's Taraval Street project. In the 6 months since the early implementation phase on Taraval, 2 merchants has gone out of business, longtime business Clover Dry Cleaning and newcomer Hunter's Thread. Also, longtime businesses such as Marcello's Restaurant have seen a significant drop-off in business. So this begs the question, has this report been vetted before the Small Business Commission or the San Francisco Council of District Merchants Associations? My understanding, based on today, neither has. So this hearing may have been premature. The process could have really started at the council, gone to the Small Business Commission, and then followed by the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Dee Dee Workman representing the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. I also want to thank you so much for having this hearing today. We at the Chamber, and me in particular, have been working on this issue for many, many years, and I'm very interested to see that it coming up again because I'm aware of the vacancy rates in our neighborhood commercial districts, and I feel like the numbers that were given today just don't really capture, I think, the crisis that we're in when it comes to filling our retail spaces in our neighborhood and keeping them in our retail commercial corridors. And some of those vacancies, they last for months and years, so I'm not sure that it really captures that. I think that what we haven't really heard a lot today is how time-consuming and expensive it is to actually get a retail permit in San Francisco, and for Formula Retail, but for other retailers as well. And I think there is such a degree of uncertainty with it that when you don't even know at the end of the day, after months and more maybe a year of going through the process, whether you're even going to be able to go into that space, that it's very discouraging for potential retailers to come into our neighborhood commercial corridors. So I hope that we're going to be taking a look at ways to expedite the permitting process for all retailers to increase the certainty and enable them to know what, to be able to get in as quickly as possible. Also, I think flexibility is key, and I heard a lot of that today. And I think it's with the changing conditions of retail in the city and in the country, I think it's very important that a diversity of uses be able to go into ground floor commercial spaces, including professional services. And one of your colleagues, Supervisor Peskin, has been promoting legislation that would restrict that. We would really encourage diversity.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Deidre Von Rock. I am the president of the West Portal Merchants Association. And while I'm pleased to hear that West Portal has the lowest commercial vacancy rate that OEWD found, that placement is certainly relative, as that is not how it appears on an objective view, and it's certainly not how it feels. In West Portal, absentee landlords who have no connection to the block or no interest in its well-being are a huge problem. For example, we had a major building on anchoring West Portal near the tunnel that the owners let sit for years and years vacant, becoming a blight because they were still collecting rent from a Formula retailer who had since left. We had a Radio Shack that sat vacant for years because the only tenant the owner wanted was another Radio Shack. Well, it's a national bankruptcy. That wasn't going to happen. Finally, Verizon showed some interest in it, but it's now been mired in the labyrinth and DBI and planning for well over a year. And just recently, one of the owners of the 4 buildings where 3 of our businesses were recently devastated has been unresponsive, delaying the recovery efforts of all the other businesses. The Merchant Association is often asked about the status of the vacancies and what can be done, and our answer really is nothing. Not until there is any more enforcement or accountability as to the vacancies. We support more stringent rules on vacancies and enforcement, and we would welcome a change in zoning for ground floor retail vacancies subject to further community input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Cornell. I've owned a business retail business for 40 years in San Francisco. I'm here also as a legislative representative of the Council of District Merchants. Nothing can do good for the businesses but more money. More business means the business thrives, it employs more people. More people means that they can buy from their neighbors. More business in, more sales is what does it for business. How can the city help? Well, the City and County of San Francisco is the largest employer in San Francisco. It has almost 4 times more than the largest private employer. Yet when the city has to buy a light bulb up here, they're going to go to Nowhere, Mississippi if it's 1 penny cheaper to get it from them. Why aren't they buying it from San Francisco businesses? If you put the money back into San Francisco businesses, we can thrive. The city has does this all the time with their largest purchase, employees. They have a policy of giving prevailing wages, the highest and best wages, because San Francisco costs more and we have very good employees. Well, San Francisco costs more for businesses, and we should also get higher prices for the people that sell here in the city. I think that's a way to help this whole problem. Thank you.
My name is Hans Hansen. I'm president of Starboard Commercial Real Estate. We actively do retail deals in the neighborhoods. We typically do not represent formula retailers, and I like to tell two stories about the realities of doing business in San Francisco. One is a bakery that we represented in South of Market. It was 1,700 square feet. It was his first operation. He budgeted $250,000 for the improvements to the space, another $160,000 for his equipment, and 10% or $25,000 towards his permitting fees and et cetera soft cost. To date, 9 months later, he is now at $750,000 in total cost and just opened his doors. The landlord did work with him on holding back rent, but this was a process to get to the CUP that took well over 9 months. Second story is 3146 Mission Street, the old Cragen's Auto Body, or auto store. We leased that out to a company called Eagle Rider that's been on 8th and Bryan Street for many, many years renting motorcycles. This was a relocation of their services to a site that was 19,000 square feet that was auto use. Previously, it was Stewart Auto store, a Chevrolet dealership. We leased out 19,000 feet. They were formula retail because there were 13 stores nationally, and they ended up taking 13 months, losing their tenant. There was their subtenant, Yamaha, and now you have a vacancy of 6,000 square feet that has to start the process all over again.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Corey Smith on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Also want to welcome Supervisor Stefani to the chamber as well. Obviously, there's a lot of really good ideas floating around here. We're big believers of the yes and approach, and one of the yes ands to a lot of this stuff that we really want to emphasize, one of the best things we can do for businesses is work to provide more customers for the businesses. I live in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood, and there's just a stretch of single-story commercial retail. It's not totally shocking to me that as a neighborhood purchaser, I don't actually spend a ton of time up and down there because there are a lot of vacant stores. The other thing that this conversation reminds me of is one of my favorite quotes from the old CEO of Netscape, Jim Barksdale, who used to say, when it comes to decision making, if we have data, we should always look at data, but if all we have is opinions, we're going to go with mine. And this is actually one of the situations where the city has provided really, really good data on a lot of this stuff. If I could get the overhead, please. So this is all maybe sort of SFMTA data. I guess I'll get a minute left. Overhead. Projector. Nope. Okay. Well, it's a couple of data points, both coming from SFMTA. The first one, and I don't think this is totally going to shock people, is that the majority of people actually get to commercial corridors by transit, by foot, or by bike. It's a lot more popular than cars. The data also show that for the people that do take different transportation methods to the actual commercial corridors themselves, people spend more money if they are walking or biking or taking transit. There's two data points here, both for the Mission Street corridor, for the Polk Street corridor as well. So again, in the collaborative, holistic approach that we need to take to help solve this problem, one of the simplest things we can do is just put more customers in the neighborhood, and that will help the businesses. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Leslie Lenhart, Union Street Association Executive Director, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you this afternoon. I agree with most of everything I have heard already from the previous speakers. I would like to just talk about Union Street, which I know so well. I've had my business there for almost 40 years, and I've seen many, many changes. Union Street is always in transition. However, in the last 10 years, it's been very challenging, and the reason is multiple. First of all, we do have the high rents, and that is unfortunately an attitude of greed from certain people. They will not rent out until they get a certain amount, and that is very unfortunate, very unfortunate. Oftentimes also we found out that we have offshore owners of these buildings, and they're hard to contact and they're unresponsive. So that goes without saying, and it is a problem. We also, you have to remember that we have had ADT situations in all of the old buildings. That is a problem too that doesn't go away, and nor should it, but it does add expense to making a possible business come into the district. I'd like to say that the tourists, they shop. They're here, they love it, they shop. And we need more tourists. We need to get rid of this ridiculous, it's not unfounded, but that we have a very unsafe city, a very, very violent city, and people are staying away. They are. I talked to a lot of European people in the past. They loved San Francisco. It was wonderful. They came from all over, and now they are hesitant to do that. So the city really has to look at that. We have to make it safer. We need more police on the streets, and we need to do something about that. I'm very unhappy about this uncomfortable feeling that I'm getting from what I'm talking to people coming into my gallery. So those are areas.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, looking at City Government Channel, which I had a lot to do to create. Oh, excuse me, madam. Welcome to the City Hall, new supervisor. You call it City Hall. I call it Silly Hall. Maybe you could help change things around. But right now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not just here to impress, but to impress on the city and county, the city by the bay, where everybody thinks, okay. I got some news breaks today, because we're here talking about OEWD. Seems like everybody in their department's scared of me, because I know they don't spend all the money that's supposed to come to the Fillmore. Look at here. You guys are talking about all the wonderful work that OEWD is doing, but you're going to hear it from me, my community, of what we think, and what we know the deal of what they came into our community, spending millions with failed efforts, misguided leadership. And the most egregious thing that I'm not going to tolerate is undermining our community. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Fillmore Corridor Ambassador. Not the bastard, but the ambassador. And right now, I'm going to try to bring my community together. We got to have unity in our community. It's no more a black community, although this is Black History Month, isn't it? You know, they gave it to us the shortest year of the month. We still got short change. My name is Ace, and I'm on the case. I got some news breaks to tell y'all tomorrow that happened today in room 200 when I went to court. My name is Ace, damn it, and I'm on the case. But I thank God, so I had to go through it to get to it. Now I'm the senior black person that goes to the community. I'm that person where you need to come to when I come back to City Hall, backed by popular demand. Ace on the case, all in your face, and now I'm going to be in this place.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Sue Hester here. I'm so glad you're having this discussion because it needs to be a discussion that we need to have and expand. There's a lot of things about neighborhood commercial districts and other neighborhoods that have commercial on them. When the absentee landlords keep a place vacant for a long time, there is a real lighting issue and a safety issue, as well as a immunity issue. They're all involved. People that walk down the streets, especially women, older women like myself that may have a cane, that don't have lighting on the sidewalk, feel very uncertain walking. So I don't think there's enough attention paid to requiring lighting on the exterior of a building so that the pedestrian walkway is lit, whether or not there's a store in there or not. It should be the landlord's responsibility, not a tenant, because a tenant moves all the time. Secondarily, the immunity is only as strong as the strength of the retail district. People feel uncertain walking down streets to a muni stop as well if the street is dark. And we should know where the muni is intensively on NCDs, Van Ness Avenue, a lot of places that have retail districts depend on the muni. And so we need to be connecting lighting and pedestrian safety and focusing on muni connections as well. It needs to be an ongoing conversation, and thank you for bringing it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public who wish to speak during public comment on this item or these two items? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Fewer.
So sorry. So thank you very much for everyone who presented today. I think I have many, many more questions for DBI. You know, I just think it's not working. Complaint-driven is not going to work. I think we have to be more proactive, and astonished to see that actually that the report shows that I didn't have any vacant storefronts in my district is just ridiculous and not true. And so I think that the data is suspect. I think that the way that we're handling, I have so many questions. For example, I want to know that how many of these landlords or these people who have these commercial properties, how many of these cases are repeat offenders again and again and again? Some in my neighborhood I know have had restaurants that have been closed down for decades. And how many are these cases, how many times are these cases, or how many cases are referred to the city attorney? And of those referred, what are the outcomes of those cases? Also, what are things that we can do to escalate? I get that we can also have a carrot and that we can help, but quite frankly, when we see abuses like this, and I'm kind of done with these out-of-town speculators that buy up a ton of property, such as Veritas was actually mentioned in public comment, and not caring about our communities and our commercial corridors and the livelihood of San Francisco. In my district, my small businesses are the backbone of my district. The services there actually serve my district's. I mean, we have hair salons, but we have restaurants, we have electronic stores, we have repair shops. These are small businesses that have thrived in my neighborhood, and as my neighborhood grows more dense, these type of services are even more valuable to the people that live there. The largest population of people in my neighborhood, largest population is growing population are seniors, and they rely on these close neighborhood small businesses to serve them. And I think that when we don't have a very good database to even track I would like to know an analysis, for example, of the small businesses that are empty, the storefronts that are empty in my neighborhood. How long have they been empty? What are the reasons? What can we do? I don't think the stick is big enough. Quite frankly, I think that if you are a owner of a commercial space in San Francisco, that is your business. You should be using that commercial space as a rental business. I think that it is your responsibility to maintain that business and actually to get a tenant. And I know that there are people who actually buy properties, commercial space, and just sit on it as speculators, and that's completely not acceptable in San Francisco and completely not acceptable in my district. And so I will say that I'm a little disappointed with DBI's presentation and lack of preparedness for this hearing, and that I hope that we will continue this hearing so that we can bring DBI back, but also I'd like to have some data from the city attorney on how many cases are actually referred to the city attorney, and that, and also what are some of the things that we can do as a city as a bigger stick for some of these landlords that are just simply not renting out their commercial spaces, waiting for another tenant that can pay more. I think that is to the detriment, quite frankly, of our neighborhoods and to the detriment of our neighborhood commercial corridors. So, as I said, I think it's the responsibility of the people who own these commercial properties to maintain them and to rent them out. Quite frankly, if you own that, you are not simply a landlord, you're in the business of commercial retail space. And I am just wondering, how many times do we have to hear about violators violating this over and over and over again, sometimes for decades? And when does the time come when the city and county says enough, and that we need to do something much more drastic? If they can't manage their buildings, maybe we should and purpose them for the public good. So I am requesting that this hearing be continued at the call of the chair so we can get more information from DBI when they're ready to present to us with the information that we've requested, along with some data from the city attorney.
Thank you, Supervisor Fewer. And I would just add that I'd like for the information, if there's a next presentation, to include beyond just the quarterly updates. We'd like to see since the span of the inception of the legislation. And of course, we know the details of legislation. We want to see where these cases or complaints are actually going. Supervisor Kim?
I just want to thank the co-sponsors of the hearing today. Supervisors Fewer, Ronan, and Yee. This is an issue that our office actually started bringing up in 2011 as we were working on the mid-market tax exclusion and just seeing the tremendous amount of storefront vacancies during the recession. But during that time, we were at an economic downturn, and so in some ways there was a level of understanding as to why commercial ground floor retail wasn't being rented out. And at the time, then President David Chiu had moved forward the vacancy fee. I think several years later, it's a little surprising to me that in an economic upturn, we're still in the same position. And I've lost so many small businesses last year, in a year that we were doing incredibly well economically. And I think it's a mixture of things. I don't think it's all just landlords that aren't reasonable, but there are definitely landlords out there that are completely unreasonable about their expectations for rent. Just on one block of Folsom, a block from my house, I'm losing 3 businesses. In South Park, we lost a restaurant, Butler and the Chef, where there are tech companies sprouting all around it. And I just know it's incredibly hard for our business owners who have such a narrow margin of profit to A, not get the support that they need from the city, but B, also have to deal with landlords who I just think have this really unrealistic expectation of what they should be charging for rent. And everyone's waiting for the miracle Chase Bank or chain store or formula retail that's going to come to their neighborhood. And so sometimes I feel like we need to educate commercial landlords on what they can and cannot do on their side as well. And just in Supervisor Fewer's district, there is a whole street of Balboa where one landlord evicted 3 tenants simply because they wouldn't pay 4 times the amount of rent that she wanted to charge them out in the Richmond. And so I think that we have to do the carrots, and I appreciate the presentation that OEWD gave, but I think we also have to do the stick as well. And some of that is just going to have to come down to enforcement. And I think the percentage of businesses that have registered for vacancy is just abysmally low. We do a good job of tagging business owners when there's graffiti on their building. We almost do that instantaneously. So it's not really quite clear why we can't ensure that that kind of enforcement is done for vacancy as well. And finally, this is slightly separate, but this continues to be an issue, particularly in our redevelopment area plans like Mission Bay. We get a lot of complaints from our residents that we don't have enough of the type of small businesses and amenities that they want to see, that a lot of these condo buildings put in businesses that can pay a lot of rent but aren't necessarily what our residents need, like hair salons, dry cleaners, the types of services that you mentioned here today, and also the type of restaurants that people want to see, the San Francisco-only restaurants with these chef owners that really kind of make neighborhoods more alive. Many in this neighborhood bring in a lot of chain stores on King Street, but even in those neighborhoods, there's a lot of vacant storefront retail. And I just feel like with these developers that we have a partnership with, we should absolutely be using any type of city leverage we have, one, for them to fill their vacant ground floor vacancies, but to work with them to put in businesses that our residents will actually partake in. But thank you again, and really a good amount of data that went into this, and I think it's really good for us to see all of this today.
Thank you. Supervisor Yee?
Thank you, Chair Tang. I want to thank the BLA and also OEWD staff for their work and analysis and the reporting today. And it really does have there's many good recommendations in there that I think we need to pursue. I'd like to say that what we need to do is to urge DBI to do a better job in just following through with the types of regulations that we have already. I also feel like when I looked at the report and saw what other locations were doing, it seems that other locations are taking it much more seriously, these vacancies, and they're more aggressive about how they're going to approach the property owners who think that they could just hold on for 5 years and that hopefully they'll get $1 million per 10,000 square feet or something. I would love to work with anybody that would like to pursue some of these more aggressive tactics, because that's the only way we're going to get this resolved. So once again, and I also want to thank the public for coming out and listening to your comments.
Thank you. Supervisor Fewer?
Yes, I'll be very brief. So Supervisor Yee, I'd love to work with you on that more aggressive tactics. And then I just want to mention, I also did not hear anything from OEWD about what I hear constantly from my small businesses, is that they are having a harder and harder time getting employees to work in their stores. Many of my small businesses have help wanted signs, and the retention rate is abysmal. They can't keep people working in their small businesses because they can't compete with the wages. And quite frankly, people aren't willing to come in 2 hours to a job that pays $15 an hour. And so I'd like that addressed at our next hearing also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So much to say. I will just concur with my colleagues. And at this time, I think I heard that we would like to continue items 1 and actually, let's just continue item 1 to the call of the chair. And then item 2, let's file that one if that's okay. Okay. So the House has changed, but we'll do that with Supervisor Kim without objection. Okay.
Those motions are passed with Supervisor Safai being absent.
Thank you. Can you, Mr. Clerk, call items 4 through 6 together, please?
Yes, I would just like to note that we no longer have a quorum of the Board of Supervisors, and we are reconvening as a committee. Item number 4, resolution approving a lease agreement between the Port and China Basin Ballpark Company, LLC for Pier 48, with a base rent of $55,416 per month from April through September and $2,916 per month from October through March, in recognition of increasing parking demand by ballpark patrons. Item number 5, ordinance amending the planning code and zoning map to add the Mission Rock Special Use District, generally bounded by China Basin to the north, Pier 48, and the marginal wharf between Pier 48 and Pier 50, in associated shoreline area, and Terry Francos Boulevard to the east, Mission Rock Street to the south, and 3rd Street to the west, to amend other related provisions. Item number 6, resolution affirming the Planning Department's certification of final environmental impact report and adopting environmental findings under the California Environmental Quality Act.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your patience on this item. I'm going to first turn it over to Supervisor Kim to speak on this item, since it is your area.
Thank you so much, Chair Tang. This project is a long time in the making, and I know that I first sat down, well, not the very first time, but the Giants and I first really started discussing in mid-2015 on this project. So 2.5 years later, it's great to finally have the project sponsor and the city in the room. This project is something I am really proud of in terms of working with the project sponsor, because it is a project that it was the very first project to commit to hitting 40% affordable and middle income housing. And it is probably one of the few projects outside of any type of redevelopment area plan that is committing to such high levels of middle income housing, something which we really as a city have not done before. And I have to say, when I first got on the Board of Supervisors, I never thought I would fight for housing for families that made between $80,000 and $150,000 a year. But that's really where we are now in San Francisco, which is that people who make very good money and that work as nurses and teachers and entry-level workers and even tech workers can't afford to live in San Francisco anymore. And so I just want to thank the Giants for hitting it out of the ballpark and really being a team that is for San Francisco by ensuring that we are building for San Franciscans and those that will contribute tremendously to the city. I also want to recognize, 2.5 years later, Local 2, Unite Here, United Educators of San Francisco, the Council of Community Housing Organizations, Todd Coe, former Mayor Art Agnos, our former Democratic Party Chair John Burton. There were so many people who were engaged and involved in this process to get to the project that is before us today. And I wish we could have had this project come to us sooner, but there are always so many things involved in something this complex and big. So I'm really just happy that we're here today. This is really, as far as I know, the largest, I would call surplus property, public surplus property that we have available here in San Francisco, about 28 acres. And, for me, it was incredibly important that the city is a partner to this project because it was built on public land, that we ensure that this is a project that meets the needs of our city. So whether it's the 8 acres of open space and parks to, again, the 40% affordable housing, to a mix of office, retail, and housing, I just think that this is the right project for this neighborhood, and it's also great to have a project where the neighborhood supports the upzoning and building and density in their backyard. Finally, I just want to recognize I do have a number of amendments that I'll be making after the presentation, but I also want to acknowledge that given the feedback that we've heard from the public, and it's really just amazing how time just changes from year to year, that we want to make sure that we maximize the housing on this project, because 40% is great when there's a lot of housing units that are being built. And I know that there are certain parcels that were zoned initially for residential or hotel. And I just want to thank the Giants for working with us in my office to ensure that all the residential parcels will be solely residential, and that we've moved the hotel option purpose to the commercial sites instead. And we heard loud and clear from many of our housing advocates that we need to be building as much housing as possible. And so thank you for pointing that out and advocating for this. But I really just think that this is a great project that is moving before us. And so we have a number of presenters today. And so I just want to recognize them in the order that they'll be speaking in. We have Phil Williamson from the Port, who will be presenting, and Matt Snyder, Senior Planner at Planning, along with Adam Van de Water from OEWD and Carly Payne from SFMTA. And from the Giants, I just want to welcome Jack Baer and Fran Weld, who will be presenting on behalf of the project sponsor. I know that we have a number of other stakeholders that are here today that will be speaking at public comment, but I just want to acknowledge the Port, of course, for your work, because this is on Port property, our City Attorney's Office, Public Works, PUC, MOHCD, SFMTA, and of course our Mission Bay Citizens Advisory Committee and Ballpark Transportation Coordination Committee, and just the entire team at the Giants. So I believe folks are speaking in the order that I presented, but I've called up all the names, so really in any order that you'd like to come up.
Thank you, Supervisor. Madam Chair, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here before you today for this project. As the Supervisor mentioned, it's been many years in the making, and we are very, very proud of it, and you'll hear that today in our presentations. And we seek your recommendation today for the items on the calendar, items 4, 5, and 6. And I will be giving a brief overview of the project and touching on some of the highlights. And then I'll be passing it off actually to Jack Baer to go into a little more detail. And he'll go on down the list of representations that representatives you just mentioned. So the Mission Rock site, to give some context to the area, I think we're all familiar with the area. This is actually an old slide now. Much of Mission Bay that is shown as undeveloped and vacant in this slide has actually been built by now. There are only a few parcels left to get this site to its completion. The largest site, as the supervisor mentioned, is Mission Rock at 28 acres. And it really will be what we like to call the exclamation point, thank you, to the Mission Bay neighborhood. It will be kind of the final piece that really brings that neighborhood to fruition and adds that vitality and vibrancy that we've been working on for the last 11 years. And speaking of that timeline, you can see that on this slide that we have been working for a while together. We appreciate the board's cooperation and assistance and advice over these years. We started out with a community outreach program over 10 years ago, and from the beginning, this project has benefited from the community input and has evolved and matured and become a better project over time with that input. The team has been very deliberate in seeking a collaborative teamwork approach to the project, both the port and the developer, working with other city agencies as mentioned, and with the community from the Central Waterfront Advisory Group, CWAG, to the Mission Bay groups as well. So again, a quick just kind of reference of what we hope to see over the next 4 phases of the project. This is the site today, and then moving forward, you see that full build out, the parks that were talked about, 8 acres, the commercial and office space, the housing, and you'll hear more about the housing for sure today. And looking at kind of a slide, a land use slide, if you will, that shows the proposed heights as approved by the recent proposition in 2015 for each of the parcels on the project site, and then listing some of the benefits of the project. The 8 acres of parks, the residential units, 40% affordable at a range of AMIs, as mentioned, a considerable amount of office space to activate the site and provide workers for those housing units. Retail, we have a very solid retail approach that will activate this site and make it a true neighborhood, and you'll hear more about that later. Pier 48 is included in the project as well. Pier 48 will exist in its current condition and current uses for the next 5 to 10 years until the port, working with the Giants, can identify a long-term use for that site that is feasible. And not to leave out parking, the site does include a structured parking facility to replace the lost surface parking that the site currently provides. I briefly mentioned phasing. This is a depiction of what we anticipate the phasing to be over the next 5 to 10, 15 years, depending on the market conditions. But importantly, starting out with phase 1 on the north side of the project, 4 of the parcels in the project would be developed in phase 1. And importantly, mentioning earlier the community outreach, one thing we heard loud and clear was that it's important to build the open space at the beginning of this project, the substantial open space at China Basin Park. So phase 1 does include that China Basin Park expansion and improvement, so that when phase 1 comes online, it will have that park amenity to add value to the parcels, of course, but also to add value to the site and to the community. And we slipped this slide in. We'll be at the GAO on Wednesday, but we also wanted to give this committee kind of a feel for why the port's doing this project. One of the reasons, at least, is that it does promise significant revenues for the port's deep needs up and down the waterfront. On the far left of the slide, you can kind of get an image of where we are today as far as the revenues we generate from parking. It's been a very successful parking lot, but you can see with the development and with all the different funding sources that the project now includes, the project really performs well for the port and therefore for the city and the state long term. And my last slide is just to give you an overview of where we are today and the upcoming next steps that we are going to be attempting to complete today. Of course, we're before you, the Land Use Committee. On Thursday, we'll be before the GAO Committee, and the next Tuesday, we'll be at the full board for consideration of the project. So I'd now like to introduce Jack Baer to go into more detail about the project, and I'll advance the deck for you, Jack.
Thank you, Phil. And my name is Jack Baer with the San Francisco Giants baseball team and the Mission Rock development team. Good afternoon, supervisors. For more than 10 years, we have worked in partnership with the Port of San Francisco and our neighbors to develop the land use plan before you today. and as a result, the plan is inspired, weaving housing, office, retail, and parks together as never quite before in San Francisco. Our collective efforts were endorsed overwhelmingly by the voters, with our proposal receiving 74% of the vote citywide and more than 80% of the vote in the surrounding community. We look forward to transforming, let me advance the slide, a huge surface parking lot into a collection of parks, an eclectic array of shops and cafes, innovative places to work, and homes for people of all backgrounds and economic means. We will energize and complete Mission Bay, making it a more vibrant place to work and to live. The parks are front and center. Our waterfront park will be one of the most celebrated open spaces in the city, with views back to the ballpark and the Bay Bridge. The square in the heart of the project will become the social hub for not only Mission Rock, but also Mission Bay. The streets are small, intimate, and carefully designed for pedestrians to gather and linger and enjoy a coffee, a meal, an art exhibit, and an overall sense of community. The smart mixture of office and housing allows for a vibrant place during the weekdays, weeknights, over the weekend, and of course before and after Giants games. The housing is integrated and in every building, with 40% of the units affordable to low and moderate incomes. CEOs and empty nesters will live alongside working families and youth transitioning out of foster care. A great deal of thinking, collaboration, and creative work went into every aspect of this plan. From our neighbors who insisted that the waterfront park be bold and come first, to our supervisor, Jane Kim, who insisted that we push hard to achieve higher levels of affordable housing. So many smart, engaged, and talented people have helped shape the collective vision for this important corner of the waterfront, and many of them are here today. And speaking of smart and talented people, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Fran Weld, who will drill down on a couple additional points.
I concur with that comment.
Now you got me all embarrassed right before I have to speak. Thank you, Madam Chair, Supervisor Kim. We're really happy to be here with you today. We wanted to touch on just some of the specific design aspects that make Mission Rock so unique within the city of San Francisco. Jack mentioned the variety of parks that we have, from the Grand China Basin waterfront recreational northern end to the urban square in the center of Mission Rock. And what we've done with our design team, including urban planners, transportation experts, landscape architects, is to make sure that the streets and the buildings themselves actually help to enhance the design of those parks. Each of our streets will have a slightly different feel depending on the location within Mission Rock, and particularly around the ground floor. We spent a lot of time looking at the ground floor design, and it was really enlightening to listen to the testimony and the presentation that preceded us around retail, because we've spent significant portion of our design thinking with our neighbors and our community around what is the kind of retail that we want to see at Mission Rock. We commissioned a neighborhood study that actually went and looked at the best of streets in San Francisco and all of the great main streets of neighborhoods in the city in order to inform exactly how much retail we should have, how it should be sized and placed within the site. We studied the sizes of the shops, from how many different, the range of the sizes of the shops, how many were on each block, what is the difference between a corner store with a restaurant and a mid-block shop, and we looked to emulate these features that were really consistent across the city in Mission Rock, which we believe will be the main street of Mission Bay. We actually went so far as to introduce an entirely new chapter of our design controls, and I know Matt Snyder is going to touch on this in more detail in a little bit, But just to preview it, we've had the urban design team and the landscape architecture team work together to ensure that those retail spaces and the ground floor of each of our buildings is really working to activate and enhance the public realm along the streets themselves. We'll also be looking at a site-wide programming for all of the retail. So we'll take a holistic approach to thinking about where restaurants should be, where coffee shops should be, where neighborhood serving retail is, where the market should be, and also to ensure that those uses will always be present going forward. And the Port's been a great partner in thinking about that with respect to the long-term planning of the site. So each time we have a phase that's up for approval, we will identify what the retail is for each building in that phase and how it fits into the overall merchandising programming of the neighborhood. Similarly, we've taken an approach, a site-wide approach, as we did with retail, to the question of environmental sustainability. And we've had some really unique design come out of this with respect to shared water recycling across the buildings. You'll see here an image that shows the residential buildings contributing to a recycled water system that then goes back out to the commercial buildings on the site. We're also looking at this for district energy so that we can share thermal energy loads between the daytime and the evening between office and residential uses. So again, the theme of looking at the community as a whole and coming up with solutions that are only possible because of the scale of this new neighborhood. Of course, we all know that one of the biggest environmental sustainability issues facing our city today is the challenge of climate change and sea level rise. We've taken a very conservative approach to this, and we're planning to withstand up to 66 inches of sea level rise. That's at the highest end of the ranges that are being projected today. We believe that by elevating the site from the center and raising up from the edges of the bay, we can protect the site and create additional amenities and recreational resources. In addition, by raising the site, we will actually be able to pile support all of the infrastructure and the streets themselves. So going down to bedrock to make sure that we're making long-term sustainable investment in our city's infrastructure for the future. This shows just an example of how you can integrate sea level rise goals with really unique design opportunities, and we're adding the recreational component into our flood and stormwater management gardens. And then along the working waterfront, it's allowed us to support the production uses that are along the industrial Terry Francois by having the loading docks double as a sea level rise barrier along the east edge of the site as well. So just a few highlights of the really, I think, innovative and unique design that's gone on at Mission Rock over the last several years that we're very excited to start to implement. And a little bit more detail on this is Matt Snyder from the Planning Department, who's been our partner in these efforts for many years.
Thank you, Fran. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Supervisor Kim. I'm Matt Snyder of Department Staff, and today I'm going to talk about the actual legislation that is before you, the Planning Code map and zoning amendments. But before I do, I wanted to just touch upon some broad planning principles. As you know, planning worked closely with the Port on setting the framework for this overall design that has brought this project before you today. The overall land use program is in sync with surrounding districts, and it's appropriate for the site from a citywide and regional perspective. It includes a broad range of mixed uses. It both has sizable amounts of residential units and jobs, and this is particularly important consideration of its location to regional transit, including the Caltrain station and several of the Muni lines. We worked with the giants in the Port and looking at the urban form, modeling with view simulations from around the city to evaluate the best arrangement of the heights, both to assure that form creates a pleasing addition to the skyline, but probably more importantly, and that looking closely at the building massing and how it relates at the pedestrian scale, that the heights and the bulk are well considered at key street and open space locations. So back to the actual zoning maps and planning code text that is before you today. The amendments will largely take the form of a special use district or an SUD, which essentially will encapsulate most of what you would find in the planning code for development throughout the city into this one part of the planning code. It addresses, in general terms, both land use and building size and design. From a land use perspective, it takes a very general approach, a very flexible and general approach, but also wanting to emphasize housing and office uses on different blocks to assure a mix across the site. In terms of building size and design controls, it provides a broad overview, but it generally then refers to a design controls document, which is a separate document that Fran referred to. And the design controls document, in turn, provides not only controls for building, but it also provides controls for open space and design regulations for the streets, their width, their quality. And the three of those design considerations work together to assure that it's creating this very lively and unique place. There is an emphasis on creating unique, specific places for different streets and for different environments. For example, I guess getting back to the frontage requirements, one of the best examples is the frontage requirements for the land uses on the ground floor. The SUD and the design controls are very prescribed in terms of the design of ground floor uses, in terms of their actual uses, in terms of their size, their lineage, what kind of characteristics they're supposed to have, ceiling heights and the like. And they work together with the controls for the open space when they're against an open space, or on the streets when they're against the streets, assuring appropriate width and proportion for people passing by, encouraging retail uses to spill out onto the open spaces to create an integrated sense of the inside and the outside. And here we see that, as Fran had mentioned, specific controls for different portions of the site, a high retail street, which will probably be the core of the activity of the site, but then other environments for a working waterfront that will reflect the existing PDR uses along Terry Francois, and then a mix of other types of environments throughout for residential and more flexible retail and commercial use. The design controls, I should say the SUD, along with the proposition that the voters passed regarding heights and bulk, and the design controls work together to assure that, again, as I said, we have a lively skyline for Mission Rock, but that also but with the design controls having more specific controls for things like modulation and character of the building. Finally, the SUD and the amendments before you will call forth further design review processes as these projects, as the buildings become ready for actual implementation. There will be a phase design review process that is actually something that the Port will take the lead on. The design review of vertical or of buildings is something that the Planning Department will take the lead on and is therefore outlined in the special use district before you. And that concludes my portion of the presentation, and I'm going to now hand it over to Adam Vanderwater, who will talk about the Southern Bayfront strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. Adam Vanderwater from the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. I won't belabor this, but we did present the concept of a negotiated framework for the entire Southern Bayfront, which is an area of San Francisco stretching from Mission Creek down to the Brisbane border back in June, July of last year under different committee representation. We'd be happy to come back and present in more detail. But generally speaking, this is an area of growth in San Francisco where we have about 36,000 existing residents and 23,000 existing workers, but it's experiencing dramatic change as it transitions from its industrial and maritime past to including mature neighborhoods of transit, open space, childcare, residential, and office uses. Our office is engaged in a number of major projects along this area, from Mission Rock at the north through the Chase Center Arena, currently under construction in Mission Bay, Pier 70, which this body recently considered, the Potrero Power Station, which will be before you later this year, through to the former Hunters Point plant, India Basin, Hunters Point Shipyard, Candlestick Point, and Executive Park. These 9 projects, in and of themselves, on top of any smaller projects that are occurring in these neighborhoods, will represent approximately 20,000 new households, a third of which we are aiming to be affordable, about 38,000 new jobs, and an area of open space equivalent to the totality of Golden Gate Park today. In looking at each of these 9 projects, we have a number of negotiating tenants that we aim for. I won't discuss these in great detail, but you heard Phil Williamson, Jack Baer, Fran Weld, and Matt Snyder touch on a number of these. When we negotiate these with our private partners, we are looking to maximize a basket of public goods that include housing affordability, transportation integration, sustainability, sea level rise protection, community facilities, open space, workforce development, and if there is existing use on site, historic preservation. When we look specifically at Mission Rock, you see that they are meeting or exceeding a lot of those targets and provide a set of public benefits that we're extraordinarily pleased to present to you today. You heard much discussion about the 40% standard for affordable housing. We have transportation, and I'll be turning it over to Carly Payne to MTA to discuss that in more detail. You heard Fran discuss sustainability and sea level rise. There is a route to rehabilitation of the historic Pier 48 shed on site, an option to provide up to 15,000 gross square feet of community serving facilities, the 8 acres of open space, and then what hasn't yet been mentioned is a very robust workforce development program with local business enterprise access, first source hiring administration, city build jobs, and a commitment by the project to fund a number of training programs to get pile drivers for those pile supported streets, and building managers and landscape gardeners and others to provide the ongoing maintenance that the site will fund. Happy to answer any questions or discuss this further, but wanted to link this back to a broader conversation that our office has been facilitating for the last 2 years. And before doing so, I wanted to turn it over to Carly Payne from the SFMTA.
Before we transfer to SFMTA, the previous slide, if I could just go back, maybe I have the wrong copy. Before that one? Okay. The first square should be 33% will be affordable below 120% AMI. So only the last 7% were between 120 and 150.
These tenants are throughout the Southern Bayfront, and they are targets for all of the 9.
Not just including Mission Rock.
Mission Rock is for a range of AMIs between 80 and 150%.
Okay, so this is regarding the entire the Southern Bayfront. Sorry, so I misunderstood that.
That's correct. So some of the projects, the Chase Center, for instance, has no housing on site. Others have historic resources, and there's a range. But this is the totality of all the 9 projects.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Tang, members of the committee, Carly Payne from SFMTA. I just want to provide a little context for the transportation framework component of this particular project. So to remind you, this project is right in the middle of an area with a number of long-planned and now on the verge of being delivered transportation projects that's really going to transform the transportation options along the Southern Bayfront, but definitely and very intensely for this future new neighborhood. The Central Subway and the associated increase in T3rd frequency as these projects come together and build out the Blue Greenway, rapid bus service along the 16th Street corridor, electrification of Caltrain, and a number of others. And this is above and beyond the numerous very site-specific pedestrian and bike and intersection improvements that MTA is currently delivering. And so that's just to really clarify that what we see in this neighborhood right now in terms of transportation options is not what the future residents and employees and visitors to this site will experience. It's going to be a quite different landscape. So as Adam mentioned, one of the components of the Southern Bayfront Transportation Negotiation Framework is transportation. When we look at transportation, we're really looking at four things. First is site design, and as you've heard from the project team, this site has really been designed with a lot of attention to modal hierarchy, supporting people walking, biking, taking transit through the design. We also look to make sure that the design principles don't end at the boundaries of the site, but that the site is being designed and the connections are being enhanced to the existing surrounding neighborhood. The second is transportation demand management, and within this project, there's a commitment to not creating or reducing 20% of auto trips that otherwise would be estimated from a project of this type through different amenities and offerings within the site to the future visitors and residents and workers of the site to really support them in making sustainable trip choices. The third is something that we expect from every project in the city, which is to mitigate any impacts on the transportation system. And for this project, the kinds of mitigations that are expected are things that enhance pedestrian safety, for instance, on 4th Street through creating new traffic signals or addressing queuing to preventing queuing along the T3 line to prevent transit delays. And then the fourth is really looking at the fees that a project pays. Now, this project, because of its initial applications dates, was grandfathered to a lower transportation fee amount, and through the negotiated terms of the project, they're paying the full transportation sustainability fee equivalent. And we at MTA, with our city partners, have agreed that these revenues, along with the revenues from the Pier 70 development, which has already been approved, will be reinvested in this area as opposed to distributed citywide. And the reason that we feel really comfortable doing this is this neighborhood and southbound of this area are really where the majority of intense development is happening and do deserve concentrated investment in transportation. And the kinds of investments that you'll see is building along that network that I described earlier. So really looking at the T3 line to reduce delays, expand capacity, closing gaps in our bicycling and walking networks, funding buses and other capital improvements for bus transit in the area, and supporting water transit. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Phil from the port.
Supervisors, that actually concludes our presentation today. We are available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And so I want to call up members of the public who came to speak on this item, and thank you so much for waiting. I have Mike Terrio, Chris Ketton, Corinne Woods, Stephanie Muller, May Aguiar, Bruce Agate, Vanessa Aquino, Amy Lemley, and Ken Trey.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Chris Kelton. My wife and I have lived in South Beach for nearly 30 years, and until recently had a small business on Townsend for 24 plus years. We have witnessed a tremendous amount of change firsthand. San Francisco is a city comprised of diverse neighborhoods, each unique and full of life. People flock to these different neighborhoods in search of something novel and different. Yet despite all the development that has gone on in the last 18 years, our area of the city becomes a virtual ghost town 9 months of the year. Where I live, people drive through on their way to a different destination. Those that live in the area leave to go to other neighborhoods. Mission Rock will create an inviting, inclusive, vibrant neighborhood drawing from the residents of Mission Bay, Mission Rock, and South Beach. Mission Rock will bring about new friendships and relationships, the very essence of community. Neighbors supporting new and more small businesses, the telltale signs of community. It will bring more affordable housing, presently in short supply. And with 8 acres of open space, it addresses a desperately needed facet of urban living. It is important to recognize that in the undertaking of this project, the Giants held numerous workshops and open houses. It is commendable the hard work and dedication exhibited by local neighborhood groups such as Central Waterfront Advisory, South Beach Rincon Hill Mission Bay Neighborhood Association, and the Mission Bay Citizens Advisory Committee, whose voices helped to shape this project. With their input and commitment to a better San Francisco, along with civic leaders, social interest groups, and other neighborhood and political leaders citywide, the Mission Rock project is a model development. It is a win-win for all. The Reverend Arnold Townsend said something at the Port Commission hearing January.
Thank you. And as the timer comes up, you're welcome to finish your sentence. So if we can allow people to do that. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Muller. I'm here to represent Delancey Street Foundation and Mimi Silbert, and we too have been in the neighborhood for almost 30 years before it was a neighborhood. And I completely agree. We've been friends and partners of the Giants with AT&T Park and the entire building of the community. And we are so looking forward to the possibility of jobs, the possibility of some affordable housing. Just as an aside, as you know better than anyone here, Delancey Street's dedicated to helping people change their lives. And they spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years at Delancey Street in this neighborhood. And when they graduate looking for jobs in San Francisco or housing in San Francisco, it's impossible. So we are so supportive and so excited about this project. And I just wanted to come here to be able to say that. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Muller. And we love Delancey Street.
Good afternoon, Chair Tang, Supervisors Kim, Safai. My name is Bruce Agate. I'm speaking in support of the items associated with the Mission Rock development. I'm involved in the community, serving on the board and transportation rep of the South Beach Rincon Mission Bay Neighborhood Association. However, my public comment today is being provided specifically as a native San Franciscan and a 9-year resident of Mission Bay. Over the past 6 years, I've had the opportunity, along with my neighbors, some for up to 10 years, to be involved in the planning process for the Mission Rock development. This included providing feedback on a variety of public documents and at numerous community outreach meetings and workshops. In addition to current residents and local businesses, those community leaders who were involved in the planning of Mission Bay from the beginning were also involved in this process. Together, we shared our insights and provided input on the project, which will help transform this part of the eastern waterfront into a vibrant and complete community, good for us as neighbors, community, and our city. As I mentioned, this community and greater stakeholder engagement helped shape the project we see today, striking a delicate balance on the amount of parks, waterfront access, housing, neighborhood-serving retail and restaurants, preparation for sea level rise, and office space. I'm not an expert in the financial aspects of development, but this project brought together an amazing and diverse group of stakeholders and experts to find the optimal mix of land uses while providing some flexibility to ensure success and delivery of the project. Even with this collaboration and consensus building, there were some last-minute discussions, thank you, Supervisor Kim, to gain agreement that this project could raise its percentage of affordable housing from 33 to 40%. With this said, today we have the parking lot along this section of the waterfront, and please provide the necessary approvals required to allow the Mission Rock development to move forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Kim and supervisors. My name is Vanessa, and I'm here to show my support for the Mission Rock. I'm a proud San Franciscan and living in Dogpatch for over 14 years, and this community is my family. I lived in various neighborhoods, but this Dogpatch community is my really close-hearted people. That being said, as board member of the Dogpatch Neighborhood Association, I've seen amazing changes and growth all around Dogpatch community, the Bayview District, Mission Bay, and Mission Rock. This is exciting. We are living in exciting times because our city is growing for the best. Here's why I ask of you supervisors to support the Mission Rock project. Mission Rock will address the need of affordable housing, which is desperately needed. As we all know, our population is increasing, and having affordable housing now is key. Mission Rock project will support area medium income, which will support low to middle income households, include public servants such as nurses and teachers. Mission Rock will have units for transitional age youth. And I'd like to share with the last 30 seconds that I have here how important transitional age youth is, because I used to live in a group home, Board of Court of San Francisco. I did not have those services after I left the group home, and I think what the Giants and Mission Rock are doing is great to support transitional age youth from foster and group homes. I ask that you please approve the Mission Rock project, and let's keep the communication going. Thank you and have a great evening.
Good evening, supervisors. My name is Karen Alschuler. I'm a 25-year resident of San Francisco and a 40-year professional planner and urban designer working on urban waterfronts around North America. I can't stay away from the excitement of the edge of a city, of a great city, or working to find the best role for that edge in the city, or reaping the benefits of the investments we and private people, city and the private people make in those areas, and taking leadership because it's so visible. It tells a story about a city. In that experience, I think Mission Rock stands out for me. I've been engaged since day one, Jack, and on the project, and I feel that it's really stayed true to its values, open arms to people, and focus on the public realm first. I'd like to emphasize quickly the way in which the community has played a really significant role through the whole 10 years. And in 10 years, you have to stay engaged, nimble, and inventive, and listen to people, what their issues are today, tomorrow, the future, and respond with a process. We do that and did that by making partners from the local community, partners around key issues, environment and energy, and focusing then, inviting them to be our partners and making decisions that are what this committee looks at, land use and transportation. We invited them to be our partners in order to get down to specifics. The neighborhoods, and particularly the local neighborhoods where people have grown to create a Mission Bay community in those years, have been invited to the table to make choices about what is needed, what fills the gaps, what needs to be programmed, so that it will be rewarding for all. There's no back door to the Mission Rock project. It's open to all of its neighbors and invites them to the table to discuss and to live there and enjoy it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Corinne Woods. I've been involved in this project for more than 10 years and in Mission Bay for much longer. I'm also a close neighbor to the Mission Rock project and AT&T Park. I want to thank the Giants for the collaborative way they approached this process. We've had many, many meetings, many, many workshops over the last 10 years, and the Giants listened to the community. I get my park up front, which is really important. I want to thank all of the other city agencies who've cooperated on this. This has been a tremendous interagency cooperative effort. OEWD, MTA, planning, public works, everybody has worked together on this to get to a project that I hope will be better than Mission Bay, and I urge your support. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the public. My name is Maya Guiar, and I serve as the Southeast Area Manager for the San Francisco Parks Alliance. The San Francisco Parks Alliance has a network of over 200 community groups leveraging their ability to develop and maintain recreational spaces through the city. Every year, we try to raise millions to improve our parks, playgrounds, and open spaces. I'm here representing the Parks Alliance in support of the Mission Rock project. I served in the Parks Alliance for 2 years, and ever since the completion of the Bay Trail and of the Blue Greenway has been a huge priority for us. We believe that opening the waterfront and making connections to reconnect the waterfront to the population, it's a really important piece of this project, and we applaud the Mission Rock's efforts on planning 8 acres of new open spaces and revitalizing this vision for San Francisco residents. The Parks Alliance believe that the Giants are investing in smart pedestrian-centric planning, and they have been extremely responsive in addressing the city needs for more active recreation opportunities. We are truly thrilled to see the San Francisco Giants' commitment on prioritizing the creation of new open spaces by adding parks to the first phase of their plan. The Parks Alliance is also particularly pleased with the considerations that have been made to address sea level rise, the creation of an open waterfront, and investments towards the use of alternative methods of transportation, such as bike connections and bike share stations. In a personal note, on my tenure at the Parks Alliance, we have been trying to inform and engage community members from all the waterfront to the different projects that are happening on those areas. Doesn't matter if we had groups of 5 or 50 people, the Mission Rock project and the Mission Rock team was always open to receive us and inform people about those projects. I'm
Thank you
here
so
today.
much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Alice Rogers, and I'd like to comment through 3 different lenses. First, as a neighbor, I'm going on a quarter century here in San Francisco, here from the Sausalito waterfront and now on this waterfront. As a neighbor, I did participate in the many workshops and hearings on this project, and I can't say highly enough how extensive the outreach was and how engaging all of the visuals were, so that neighbors could really engage in a thoughtful way. I'd also like to mention I'm a director or an officer of the South Beach Rincon Neighborhood Association and Mission Bay. And while our neighborhood association does not endorse nor oppose projects, we prefer to let our neighbors do that on their own. We do engage on policy levels, and this development team was very generous in meeting with us on the retail and public realm component, and they, over the course of their development, shared the information that they were cultivating, and they really are a beacon for us in terms of retail and public realm. We have a failed retail and public realm at the moment, so we are very looking forward to this. And lastly, I'm a director of Walk San Francisco, and I would like to commend this project in terms of its pedestrian safety. It, again, is a standard bearer on that level. It addresses our values of diversity, inclusion, and equity, and after that, we hope that you won't see Mission Bay on the map as a data point, because they've instituted so many of the Better Streets and Safe Streets standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, supervisors. My name is Ken Trey. I'm a retired 25-year social studies teacher in San Francisco, and I'm here today representing the United Educators of San Francisco. And we're the 6,000 plus folks who keep our public schools running day in and day out. So the first thing that UESF wants to note here is that we are in full support of this project. And in fact, if I was wearing my hat, I'd tip it to the Giants, to Supervisor Kim, to the neighbors, to our labor partners, Local 2, the hotel workers and others, who reached a 40% affordable rate of housing 40% affordable rate of housing in the city of San Francisco. So I have been involved in many negotiations over too many years, and this outcome is superlative. It represents San Francisco values. One part of the agreement I want to note, and I'm sure the follow-through will be there, is that in the plan, there is the space to make sure that San Francisco educators find their homes in the Mission Bay project. And so I know that in a few years there'll be a number of teachers and other school staff with the other thousands of neighbors will be enjoying the incredible open space, the livable breadth of the roads and the retail shops, be enjoying that space, and also that we'll have a number of teachers and school staff who will be able to walk to teacher night at the ballpark.
Thank you, Mr. Trey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Amy Lemley, and I'm the Executive Director of John Burton Advocates for Youth. We're an advocacy organization that works on behalf of homeless children and youth in California's juvenile justice and foster care systems. Now, as many of you are aware, children enter our foster care system due to abuse and neglect. And the good news is California's system has improved considerably in the last 10 years. The majority of young people will be safely reunified with their family or exit to adoption or guardianship. However, there's a small but persistent group of young people who don't exit to guardianship, reunification, or adoption, who actually remain in our foster care system until they are no longer age eligible. Now, these young people have very poor outcomes as adults. Within 24 months, 1 in 3 will experience homelessness. Long term, it's even worse. If we really care about long-term chronic homelessness, this is the opportunity to intervene. And I'm very happy to report that's exactly what this project does. It has set aside these beautiful units for San Francisco's former foster youth and integrated those units into the mainstream housing, which is just spectacular. So we know that with this foundation, former foster youth in San Francisco will have the opportunity not just only to stay in their community, but also to get a leg up in higher education, as well as have economic security. So I urge your support, and thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Tang, Supervisors Kim, Safai, and Peskin. My name is Henry Kanilowitz. I'm the president of the South Market Business Association and also of the San Francisco Council of District Merchant Associations. I got your name right? Thank you, Supervisor. This is a really fabulous thing that the Giants are doing, building not just a place for housing, not just a place for shopping, but actually a village. And a spectacular village is going to be. Here's a bare piece of land, been sitting there vacant for years and years, and nothing been happening. And here they are. And as was just said a second ago, 40% affordable housing. How often do we get that from a developer? You don't get that too often. I commend the Giants for what they're doing for this city and what they're doing for this part of town. I look forward to going in there when they finish and going into those shops, be it a grocery shop or a cafe or a barber or whatever's going to be in there. I think it's going to be fabulous. And the paths to walk on, the open parkland, fabulous project. Giants, you are great. Go Giants.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm John Delberling at Todco. And despite all these this project's very strong features that are positive, there is still one fundamental flaw with it that has been there all these years. It does not provide enough housing for all its future workforce that will be in the office buildings on that site. It does not achieve 100% jobs housing balance. And it's clear to everybody in this room, and it's clear to all of you, that our city has clearly been overwhelmed by the housing demand that has come from its extraordinary expansion of offices and technology jobs in the last 10 years. Overwhelmed. And it's no fair to promise other housing that's going to be built on Treasure Island to meet the deficit that this project will cause. From now on, these large projects like Pier 70, India Basin, this project, the power plant site, and maybe others, need to be completely self-sufficient with a 100% jobs housing balance. This is a great housing site. It's a great housing site. There's no problem with the economic feasibility of building the housing here. There is a way to not solve the problem, but do a lot to lessen the deficit. This project includes flex sites that could be either housing or office development in the future. what should be done is this agreement should be modified so that those sites will have to be housing sites. That will bring it pretty close to full jobs housing balance, just like Pier 70 achieved. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Kristen Hall. I'm a San Francisco resident, and I also work in the neighborhood of Mission Rock. But I'm here today to discuss my experience working on this project over the past 5 years and just share some of the ways that it's such a model for development in this city. It's especially a model for how to collaborate with many city agencies to really engage them, as Supervisor Kim called them, make them partners for development, really working collaboratively with the city. It's also a model for a walkable urban environment with blocks half the size of Mission Bay to create a really wonderful, exciting waterfront experience with many paths to the waterfront. It's also a model for how to commit and create a retail environment that is supportive of small businesses. And a lot of that information we actually learned by working with the South Beach Rincon Hill Neighborhood Association to understand what some of the challenges have been for them and to really bake that into the project approach to make sure that it works. It's also a model for how to move bikes through a neighborhood along the waterfront, cyclists from 8 to 80 years old. It's a model for designing for sea level rise and adapting to changing conditions. And as an example of that, we started by looking at 55 inches of sea level rise, which was at the time the most conservative approach. And over the 10 years that we've been working on this project, the projections increased, and we adapted our response to make sure we were still at the highest level of 66 inches of sea level rise. It's also a great example of how you can use ongoing conversations with neighborhood groups, ongoing conversations with city partners to really continually make sure that it will be a model for development in the city moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, supervisors. Very quickly, I support this project wholeheartedly. It is outstanding. Very early on when I first read about the project, before I had even spoken with anyone on the development team or with the Giants organization, I expressed to late Mayor Lee that really, all things being equal on large projects, we should never accept anything less. Not only struck by how much affordable housing is, but the deep affordability. As most of you know, the constituency that we serve out of our church and in the Fillmore district cannot afford what we normally call affordable housing. This has deep affordability, and we can perhaps quit losing our members to churches in Antioch and Pittsburgh and all over the Bay Area, but they can't live in San Francisco. It will offer an opportunity for people who desperately want to come back, many of them to the city of their birth. This is absolutely essential. Also, the amount of work it will provide, but there's something else that hasn't been talked about. In talking about the commercial units, looking at them and with the Giants' willingness to create smaller commercial units so new businesses, people who are hopeful of becoming entrepreneurs, can go here and open up. In our community, of course, the lack of African-American business is disgraceful in this city, and it's amazing because we usually just can't afford the spaces that are available. This has an opportunity to change some of that. You need to support this 100%. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Reverend Townsend. And seeing no further public comment, ask the chair if we can close public comment.
All right, public comment is closed.
I want to thank all the members of the public for coming out today. And also, as we talk about vacancy storefront in our previous hearing, I know the Giants have spent quite a bit of time with our residents to figure out how we can bring the types of amenities and services I was talking about. And I appreciate the smaller footprint for the commercial areas so that we can have more small businesses that are truly San Francisco small businesses. I have several amendments that I'd like to make and put into the record, and I've made copies for all the members of the committee on item number 5 on page 9, lines 19 through 25. I'm making the amendment, which I had talked about earlier, which would move the hotel potential use to the commercial parcels and out of the residential parcels. On page 11, in section 4, striking hotel uses up to 300 rooms are permitted in any location in which residential uses are permitted. We are striking that. Also in spirit with what I'd spoken in my opening remarks. On items number 6, to the CEQA findings, on page 3, lines 20, adding a new whereas clause, just that the board has reviewed and considered the information on these following dates, and also that the final EIR considered the effects of constructing a 300-room hotel, and that we are moving out of the residential use, but moving it again to the commercial parcels. And then finally on page 4, lines 12 through 14, in the further resolved that the Board of Supervisors find that the modifications incorporated into the project, including without limitation the change in the hotel variant analyzed in the planning memorandum. So all of these amendments were put into place through agreements with the project sponsor to again move the hotel out of the residential parcels so that we can build as much housing as possible. And I do want to appreciate John Elberling, who came to speak. I think the jobs housing balance is something I continue to be concerned with. In this project along the waterfront and in Central Soma. We do need to build more office and commercial space. There frankly isn't enough for that, but we're not even meeting our housing need today. So I appreciate the aggressive advocacy that we're hearing at all of our meetings that we maximize housing, and we got to get those major projects built at Park Merced and Treasure Island as well. But it is unfortunate how slow going these major projects can be with the infrastructure investment that's involved in them. But I think that we have to continue that conversation beyond this project, and I look forward to continuing that conversation with Planning and Office of Economic Development. So, colleagues, I have made my motion to amend to these items.
All right, so colleagues, for items, again, just to repeat, 5, page 9 and 11, and then item 6, page 3 and 4. So if we can do that without objection, okay, we'll adopt the amendments for those 2 items, and then on the balance of all the items.
Colleagues, I just make a motion to move this forward with recommendation to the following board meeting next Tuesday.
Okay, and that would be for items 4 through 6. We will do that without objection. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
All right, Mr. Clerk, can we please call item 7? And we are now joined by Supervisor Peskin.
Item number 7 is an ordinance amending the building code to allow recovery of costs of third-party experts and other permit-related expenses and making appropriate findings.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Supervisor Safai, Supervisor Kim. This is a very basic change to the building code, which Mr. Strawn here can speak to, but basically the legislation will allow the department to engage third-party experts for evaluating permits for complex projects. This grows out of discussions and hearings that we've had around the Millennium Tower issue, and direct engagement would eliminate the need for the department to coordinate third-party experts with project sponsors. And Bill, if you want to or Mr. Tom, if you want to make a quick presentation. I know my colleagues have been in this committee for hours and hours. The floor is yours, if the chairs.
Thank you, Supervisor, and thanks very much for sponsoring this. I think you framed it very well. We're in the process, as I believe you know, of setting up through an RFQ process a pool of third-party future tall building peer review experts. And that process actually is going to conclude at the end of this month. So having this cost recovery fee mechanism in place is very important for the department because it will then enable us to make sure we can issue the contracts, and we will change the old way of doing business, and we'll have what we think is a much better way of doing business. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that is it for the presentation? Okay, and we have this other sheet here, so colleagues, if you have any other questions, we can refer to that. So shall we open it up to public comment? Okay, any members of the public wish to comment on item 7? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Peskin?
I would, if you are willing, colleagues, like to send this to the full board with recommendation.
Okay, great. And Supervisor Peskin is now a voting member of this body. We'll do that without objection. Item 8, please.
Item number 8 is an ordinance amending the Public Works Code and Administrative Code to update provisions on street encroachment permits, establishing appeal procedures and fees, waiving the annual public right-of-way occupancy assessment fee in lieu of the waiver for permit fee payment for certain projects, modifying the street encroachment permit process, and creating a temporary street encroachment permit for a maximum period of 30 months.
Thank you. And Supervisor Peskin, would you like to start this item?
Sure. As you all recall, this piece of legislation came to committee back in June and was the subject of some amendments at the board in July. And we heard some concern about those amendments, and on second reading sent the legislation back to committee. And over the last several months, we have had a working group, and I want to thank Andrus Power from the mayor's office, and Raul Shaw and Jerry Sanguinetti from Public Works, and Robin Havens and Ken Rich also from the mayor's office, as well as my staff, and most particularly the person who's had to grapple with the drafting, our Deputy City Attorney, John Malamet. And I also want to actually acknowledge my interns who did some extensive research that I don't think anybody had ever done before, going back to 1975 at the dawn of major encroachment permit granting by the city. And they really helped us with data that informed what is before you today. Let me just start out by saying that really what this does is bring our major encroachment permitting scheme into the dawn of the 21st century. It's 40 years old. It had no due process, appeal rights, and what I think we've crafted in front of you is the subject of a lot of collaborative work and agreement. I also want to thank Mohammed Nuru, who sent me a text message earlier today supporting the legislation. Again, I know you guys have been in here for hours and hours. I adopted something in here from a piece of legislation I actually passed almost exactly 17, or introduced almost exactly 17 years ago. I just went back on Legistar. On February 1st of 2001, I actually introduced a change to the conditional use process that allows 5 members of the board to bring appeals of conditional uses to the board itself. And we have copied this in virtually the same way. It allows neighbors and neighborhood groups to get a hearing in front of the Director of Public Works on encroachment permits, allows applicants to get hearings in front of the Director of Public Works. I think it is well thought out. I'm happy to answer any questions. I do have a number of amendments which Deputy City Attorney Malamet can speak to. They are before you, colleagues, and a copy has been given to the clerk. And in the interest of time, I don't know how much. Yeah, absolutely. So let me just, Supervisor Safai has asked me to read them in the record. The first, in summary, is to require that major encroachment permits include detailed obligations of the permittee and require the permittee to keep maintenance records as a further incentive to keep such improvements in a good state of repair. The next, that's on page 3, the red language there. The second one is requires Board of Supervisors findings for the basis of revocation, including costs of revocation and restoration. Also changes the previous legislation that says if the Board of Supervisors fails to act, the director's underlying decision stands. The next one on page 6 is the community appeal for administrative hearing provision and builds in timeframes for an opportunity for the permittee to cure any defects. The next one on page 6 also is the director can approve the petition to revoke community appeals. That 3 community appeals are grounds for revocation, which include failure to cure. The next one on page 7 limits the grounds for revocation and narrowly tailors them and indicates that demonstrable evidence must be included. And then finally, there is a provision that says if the board requires posting of a bond or other security, the permittee shall provide evidence to the department that the bond or other security is operative on an annual basis. If the board authorizes the director of public works to allow a transfer assignment of a permit that is or will be subject to the maintenance endowment, and said permit has or had a construction cost of $1 million or greater, then the director shall impose the same requirements set forth in subsection H as a condition of transfer or assignment. That is all of the amendments.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Any other questions or comments? Nope. Okay, so let's open up item 8 to public comment then. Any members of the public? Seeing none, item 8, public comment is closed. Do we have a motion?
I would like to move the amendments and then send the item as amended to the full board with recommendation.
All right, we'll do that without objection. Thank you. And Madam Clerk, is there any other item before us today?
That concludes our business for today.
Thank you. We are now adjourned.